There is a story remembered by few. This is a story from a long, long time ago. Such a story begins with the opening of a gate discovered by a human king. This portal connected his world to another. When the portal was opened, humans fled in terror. This was because, from that newly opened portal, terrible monsters emerged. The truth was that the other world connected to it was the dark and frightening demon realm, home to the demons. From that portal, monsters overflowed endlessly, and that world, which had once been peaceful, was plunged into chaos. Many humans perished, and the world was bathed in red. In the face of this calamity, a human king desperately pleaded with the gods, "O gods, please grant us the power to expel the evil monsters." Thanks to this plea, a radiant light fell from the sky, and the monsters were transformed into dark smoke, dissipating away. After this, some humans were marked with a special symbol, gaining mysterious powers. Those who possessed the power to oppose the terrible monsters were acclaimed by the people and came to be known as mages. Thus, peace was able to return to that world. However, one question still remained. Had it truly been the gods who answered the king's wish, or something else? Running through a crumbling castle, a man found a young boy amidst the skeletons of monsters. Gasping, the man, dressed in knightly attire, was shocked to see the boy in that place. Facing the young one with a calmer gaze than he should have for his age, the man discovered the answer to the fateful question. Far from there, illuminated by the light of the moons, several carriages were parked outside a grand ballroom. Inside the hall, the guests chatted and enjoyed the music in that luxurious setting. But not everyone. Descending a staircase, a lady with golden hair was irritated. She remembered that her maid had said that the mages were gathered at this ball. However, seeing that only disgusting nobles were present, she regretted coming as well. Hearing Seren's words, her assistant tried to ask her to speak more quietly so as not to be overheard, but Seren could only think about the dark mage, whom her assistant had mentioned would appear, completely deceiving her. Still, the assistant tried to convince Seren that there would be other chances to meet him, which did not soothe the singer, who was determined to sing a song before leaving. Putting that aside, the maid asked Seren if she had heard about the warnings regarding monsters in the Lufin forest recently. "Miss, I heard that a carriage passing through the forest was brutally attacked not long ago." The maid's comment only made Seren even more irritated, as even in the face of danger, those nobles were still pathetically celebrating, as if nothing was happening. Seren sighed heavily. She truly wanted to meet the famous dark mage. When Seren stepped onto the stage, everyone's attention turned to her. Many couldn't even believe that Seren, the singer, was standing before them. It was said that her voice was angelic, and now they would find out if the rumors were true. However, just as Seren was about to begin her song, she was stunned by the reaction of the people in front of her. Her performance hadn't even started, but everyone looked frightened and perplexed. But their expressions were not directed at Seren. Instead, they were gazing at something they saw through the ballroom windows. Various dark monsters appeared, causing the guests to flee in terror. Realizing that the panic was not because of her, Seren looked back with wide eyes. Giant lizard-like monsters shattered the window behind her, ready to invade the hall. As everyone fled in horror from those red eyes, Seren froze. Not understanding what was happening, she found herself facing the creatures advancing toward her. Just as she was about to be captured, she heard someone shout her name. In the blink of an eye, a man wielding a spear appeared to defend her. His attack, shrouded in shadows, struck the giant lizards, which roared in pain. Seeing the strength of that man, Seren's eyes widened in surprise as she followed each of his movements. He charged at the monsters, which hesitated in the face of such power. Outside the hall, several of those lizards were climbing the walls, but with a great surge of energy, the man evaporated them all at once. Even with his face smeared, Seren remained motionless. Seeing her fall to her knees, her assistant rushed to her side to help. Approaching, the assistant asked Seren if she was all right, but the singer simply ignored her, focused on the person who had appeared to save her. Her eyes were still replaying what they had seen, giving her the certainty that this man was the dark mage. Outside, the man was illuminated by the moons, standing over the body of one of the monsters he had eliminated. From there, he looked toward the hall with his deep blue eyes. Even as the assistant tried to lead her to safety, Seren refused to go, wanting to see the dark mage. Upon hearing the name spoken by the singer, several people were surprised. They couldn't believe that such a famous figure in Ophion was there to save them, just as he had done on a certain famous day. Entering through the broken window, the man, dressed in dark clothing, walked toward the singer. She was startled when he approached her, but gently he asked if she was hurt. Seren replied that she was fine. The man seemed relieved by her answer. First, he apologized for making a request in such a situation, and placing his hand over his chest, asked if he could ask her a favor. Immediately, Seren clenched her fists and confidently replied that she would do anything. The man reached into his coat, pulling out paper and a pen, and made his request. "Please, could you give me an autograph?" Incredulous, Seren had to ask if he really wanted an autograph. Hearing from the dark mage that this was exactly what he desired, the singer asked for his name. The next day, the protagonist returned to the city. People in the corridors easily recognized him due to his distinctive clothing. Upon seeing the man in the black hood, they were drawn to his presence and began to murmur among themselves. Some wondered if he had completed a mission, while others wanted to approach him to speak. Faced with so many people, the dark mage remembered why he hated crowded places. It was exactly for this reason that he dressed the way he did. After walking for a while, a woman called out to him, waving. The young woman with short hair, carrying a stack of papers, was surprised and curious about what had brought Blow to enter through the main gate at that hour of the day. The girl could guess the answer to her own question. He must be there to see the master and report on a mission. The protagonist confirmed the reason for his visit, recalling the depressing mission. The girl couldn't help but laugh when she realized she had guessed correctly. Changing the subject, the protagonist asked what she was carrying. She didn't go into detail, stating it was just some paperwork. They then said their goodbyes, arranging to have a meal together later to talk. As Ren was leaving, she accidentally dropped a piece of paper, something the protagonist easily noticed. When he picked it up, he inadvertently saw its contents, becoming quite surprised. On the paper was a photo of him holding a red rose, accompanied by a large title. "For you we will fulfill any request. For inquiries, contact Ophion." Seeing that Blow had picked up the paper, the girl ended up dropping all the others she was holding. Shocked, the protagonist asked what his master was doing. The girl realized she'd gotten herself into trouble. To rid herself of the blame, she claimed she had been totally against the idea before starting to explain what the master had done. However, before she could finish, the person to whom she was revealing the truth suddenly disappeared. In an office, a man was sipping coffee while enjoying the view from the window. Blessed with the good weather of the day, his peace was disturbed when Blow kicked the door open. Turning to see who was trying to break it, the man was hit by a piece of paper. Irritated, he removed the paper from his face, only to find Blow standing there. The man was extremely excited to see him, as he had been expecting his arrival. Seeing the irritated look on the protagonist's face, he feigned ignorance, asking if someone had mistreated him. At the question, the protagonist exploded with fury. "You! It was you who bullied me! Look at the paper!" Finally, the man looked at the paper, but his curiosity quickly turned to silence. In an instant, he opened the window and simply discarded the paper. Watching it fly away, he smiled as if it had never existed. His master's actions only made the protagonist more irritated. His situation was already difficult, as wherever he went, people followed him, causing chaos. And now something like this was being done without his permission. The man disregarded the protagonist's feelings. Crossing his arms, he commented that the superstar of Ophion was being very shy. Irritated, the protagonist slammed his hand on the table while placing a paper on it. The master was startled by that, and upon picking up the paper, he realized that it was actually Seren's autograph. Irritated, the protagonist warned that this would be the last ridiculous mission he would undertake. Hearing this made the man who assigned him missions very sad. He immediately showed a stack of papers. "Look at this. The rescue of the puppy requested by Miss Ellen, the delivery of Roan's love letter, along with many other missions, all waiting for you." The protagonist refused to do any of those missions. Still, the man reminded him that Blow always managed to fulfill the missions, like this time dealing with Seren, who was so difficult to handle. Hearing the man's words, the protagonist disagreed, remembering that Seren didn't seem difficult at all, even though she was trembling due to the attack. The man was surprised to hear Blow mention an attack, as he remembered that Seren was in Ravi, a safe zone. However, the protagonist shattered his illusions, stating that there were monsters there. They were medium-sized, not very strong, but the fact that they appeared in Ravi, a place under the protection of the tower, isn't that strange? Upon hearing what had happened, the master agreed with the protagonist's thoughts, deciding to conduct some investigations in the future. Changing the subject, the man went back to praising the protagonist for getting the autograph even in that situation, which irritated him as he recalled the stupid mission. Setting that aside, the master faced the protagonist. "How long do you intend to stay in this form, Rude?" The protagonist was irritated by the question, as he needed to stay in that form to continue receiving various missions. Around the protagonist, a black mist emerged through his power. "My name is Blow. Release awakening." The energy grew stronger after the protagonist canceled the magic. leaving the master surprised to see him, to the point of asking if he had gotten taller since the last time. Before him stood the young man he had found in the ruins of the castle some time ago. With his severe eyes, Rude asked if he had really grown taller. At that moment, he remembered something important. Banging on the table, he asked the man to give him a real mission now that he had brought him the autograph. In the face of Rude's stern gaze, the man smiled without giving him an answer. Seeing that he seemed uninterested in giving him a mission, Rude asked again. But this time, the man became serious for the first time. Rude, after that day, not only ordinary people, but also wizards are keeping an eye on you. In fact, the association is actively searching for you, and it will only get more dangerous from here on out. Things will not be the same anymore, and I'm concerned about that. Contradicting the man's words, the protagonist showed the poster he had made once again. Telling the man to keep his jokes to himself, Rude asked if he would give him a mission or not. Thinking for a moment, the man revealed that there was a big mission. There is an auction that takes place 3 times a year, specializing in rare and unique items. This time, a magical stone will be auctioned. The protagonist was familiar with this type of high-level magical stone. However, the man revealed that there was a problem. Other wizards also knew about this stone. With a serious look, the man asked Rude if he knew what that meant, that the mission could be quite fun. After Rude left, the master began to look over some papers. In his hand, there was something he had not been able to deliver to Rude, an admission letter for the Helios Magical School, something that would leave him quite irritated upon receiving it. The auction was taking place on a cloudless night. People of all kinds were present, from nobles to wizards. In the center of the auction house, where there was a gigantic statue, several guards walked back and forth, ensuring security. A man in a blue suit appeared among the guards, bowing. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for waiting. The auction today, which many have been eagerly anticipating, has begun." With the host's permission, people started to walk around the hall to look at the items. Ren, also present at the auction, looked at the items while sighing. There were so many people there that it made her realize that the magical stone, Heart of Shizarnu, must be something important. Beside her, Rude explained that it was very rare for a stone of such caliber to appear in recent days. Being able to look at everything from a higher angle, Ren commented that there were many wizards around, which led her to ask the protagonist, the Black Mage, if he was okay with that. Without changing much of his expression, the protagonist confirmed that everything would be fine. Whispering, the protagonist stated that both his purpose and his goals were different from those of the other wizards. Leaving Ren with doubts about what he meant, Rude still wondered what the master meant by saying that the mission could be fun. That day, in the office, he asked what the mission was exactly. Then the master explained the details. He would have to find someone who would appear at the auction and fulfill that person's deep resentment, delivering a sweet revenge. Explaining correctly, the master stated that, apparently, a wizard had ruined the client's life, and the request was to take revenge on him. After researching a bit about the mission's target, the master discovered that he resembled a villain from the books who hunted and exploited weaknesses. Even recently, he had made many victims. Although he always skillfully managed to avoid being caught by the law, however, it was reported that this was a third-class wizard, and the protagonist commented that the target would not be easy, and it was for this very reason that the mission was being assigned to him. Knowing there must be some catch, the protagonist asked if he shouldn't just end the target's life. Obviously, the master stated that it wouldn't be satisfactory that way. He recalled how there would be many people at the auction because of the magical stone, whether participants, spectators, or people with other objectives. With so many people, it would first be necessary to find such a wizard and then capture him. Hearing the new objective of the mission, the protagonist frowned. The master began to list what needed to be done. The target should be left without arms, and a forced investigation should be conducted. After that, his pants should be removed. Hearing the last part, the protagonist was so surprised that he tore up the mission letter that was in his hands. He didn't understand what kind of revenge involved such a thing. The master didn't know very well, but that was the client's request. According to this client, there were rumors that this wizard was a member of a criminal organization that had disappeared many years ago. This organization had been declared eradicated, but given the large reward offered for finding them, it wouldn't be surprising if some had escaped. Radin, the city where the auction would take place, had a deep hatred for this organization called Kotal. The members of this organization had the tradition of marking their legs with the group's emblems using the poison of a lemon snake, a mark that could never be removed. The reason for removing the wizard's pants was precisely to expose this mark in front of everyone. Revealing the entire content of the mission, the master asked if this wouldn't be a satisfactory revenge. Silent for a moment, The protagonist asked if the return of this organization wasn't just a rumor, questioning what would happen if there was no mark when he lowered the wizard's pants. For the master, whether there was a mark or not, it would be a well-executed revenge. The protagonist had initially decided to refuse the mission, but after seeing his master plead, he ended up accepting. Now he was waiting. Ren wanted to know if it was okay to follow this plan, but Rude hoped to find out somehow soon. In another area, an excited young girl was hanging over the railing to see the people attending the auction. Adjusting her glasses with one hand, a butler held the princess by her clothes, asking her not to play around. Putting her back in her seat, the butler asked her to watch quietly, but the princess was too excited to stay still. However, upon seeing the woman named Tessie enter the hall where she was, the princess changed her focus. However, Lady Tessiana was not in the mood for games. Leaning against the wall, she ended up falling asleep while standing. Near where the princess was, a young man named Lapis was watching the auction attentively. The man beside him instructed him to keep his head up, observing carefully. Since there were many wizards gathered, it was certainly worth their attention. Although he didn't like being there, Lapis forced himself to obey his father's commands. Elsewhere, a man with animal ears looked toward a corner where his companion Sikwe was. Seeing how his companion was tearing leaves off a branch, he reminded him that they had the mission to guard the magical stone. He repeated the instruction again, but Sikwe continued tearing off the leaves, repeating with each leaf he pulled, "He comes, he doesn't come, he comes, he doesn't come." Seeing that Sikwe hadn't heard him, the man with animal ears became tremendously irritated. However, to show that he had heard, Sik addressed him, "Shut up, old man." The man was extremely annoyed at being called old, but Sik paid no attention to him, as he had reached the last leaf. Pulling off the last leaf from the branch, he dropped it on the ground, stepping on everything. Smiling as he turned branches and leaves to ashes, he walked over to his companion. "He comes?" The auction continued normally, with the item of the moment, a necklace, being bid on by a lady right in front of the audience. After selling the last common item, the host prepared himself. "Now everyone, it's finally time for the star of today's auction. Some of you may know, but this is an extremely rare item that we managed to acquire after great difficulties. The finest magical stone infused with the power of the great Shazarnu, the heart of Shazan." As the cloth was pulled off the dome, the item it protected shone splendidly. The people present at the auction were left in awe at such brilliance, such energy. The auctioneer seized the opportunity to further glorify the item. "Look at this radiant shine. Just by looking, don't you feel its tremendous power? This is the rare opportunity to obtain a powerful magical stone. It's now or never." Staring at the magical stone, Ren asked the protagonist if he had already found the target. Also looking at the stone, the protagonist revealed that he was able to see clearly. Ren misunderstood the protagonist's words, who was so focused, so he quickly explained that the energy of everyone in the hall was mixed. Furthermore, there was a possibility that the wizard hadn't shown up. Standing up, the protagonist left Ren alone to prepare. He pulled the curtain so that no one could see him, and while releasing his energy, he used the transformation magic. "My name is Blow. Awaken!" From the symbol on Rude's hand, dark energy enveloped his entire body, and before Ren, he transformed, leaving the girl stunned as always. She still couldn't believe she knew a wizard like him, a rare wizard who could change his appearance. She was still wondering aloud, how could a kid like Rude turn into such a charming young man? After the protagonist's transformation, Ren opened the curtain again, asking how his mana was. Rude had enough mana. However, there was something more important. They were coming. At the moment Ren asked whom Rude was talking about, a sound of breaking glass echoed through the auction house. The two approached the railing to observe and saw people screaming and guards moving. A thin man with green hair had taken the auctioneer hostage, ordering everyone to get out of his way. He and his partner, a serious man with a ponytail and a scar over his eye, stood before the mana stone, declaring it theirs with the hostage in their possession. Ren didn't know who that guy was, but Rude didn't seem worried about acting against him. In the auction hall, the duo of bandits was immediately surrounded by the guards. "Drop your weapons, put them on the ground and step away." With a crazed look, the bandit holding the hostage warned that they would be the ones to back off. With a shout, he unleashed a powerful wave of energy toward the guards. The wave hit the guards, who immediately began to feel a strong dizziness, losing focus on the thieves. In the next instant, the man with the scar threw his energy-infused blade to strike all the soldiers. After hitting all the guards, the blade returned to the mage's hand without any issue. Throwing the auctioneer to the ground, the bandit couldn't believe it. The situation was becoming so boring that he thought it would be better to leave. Since the mana stone was unprotected, he headed toward it to grab it. However, his hand was grabbed by someone, the hand of an unknown man. Frowning at the sight of the animal ears, the bandit asked the man who he was. However, the hand of the man with animal ears tightened even more, causing him to fall to the ground. Finally, as he looked at the man's cloak while screaming in pain, he realized he was facing a mage from the association. Upon hearing about the association, the people present at the auction were surprised. They began to observe the animal ears and tail the man had, recalling a famous mage with such characteristics. Many repeated the name they knew, the association's doormat, the hunting dog, Lanoste. Hearing what he was called, the veins in the mage's face bulged. He turned, shouting at the people in the auction, "Who was the fool that called me a dog?" Before Lanoste, the man with the scar became furious. Raising his energy to the maximum, he threw his weapon toward the back of the association's mage. Lanoste was hit in the head. However, without injury, the weapon ricocheted off. The bandits realized they had caused no damage, while the only weapon they had was lodged in a wall. The rage Lanoste felt was further inflamed. "Hey dude, that hurt, you know?" In the bloodshot eyes of the hunting dog, the bandits nearly soiled their pants. Ren, watching the scene, was surprised. She thought there were only vultures providing security, but surprisingly someone incredible was hidden among them. She was even more surprised that it was a mage from the association. Watching beside her, the protagonist sat on the railing. He told her to take a good look, as that person had been with someone significant on that fateful day. Despite her surprise, Ren understood what rude meant. In the center of the hall, after beating up the bandits, Lanoste took care to calm the people. "All mages here, listen. I know you're anxious because of the rare mana stone that has appeared, but if you act impulsively, it will be the end for you. So stay quiet until the auction is over. Understood? Anyone who touches the mana stone or seems suspicious from this moment on will face me and regret it." With that said, Lanoste prepared to cover the mana stone with a dome again, but he was astounded. Beneath his nose, the mana stone had disappeared. The auctioneer pointed to the statue in the middle of the hall. Up there stood a person, surprisingly. To Lanoste's shock, the person holding the mana stone was his companion Sik. Ignoring his partner, Sika began to murmur, "I can feel it. I feel that he's definitely here." Lanoste didn't understand what Sika was doing until his companion started shouting, "Hey, Blackie, this is your goal too, isn't it? If you want it, why don't you come and take it from me? If you don't show up, I'll devour this mana stone myself." The people didn't understand who the hell Sik was looking for, or what would happen to the mana stone. Beside the protagonist, who had transformed into Blow, Ren asked if the Blackie Sik was referring to could be him. At the question, the protagonist fell silent, which was already an answer. Ren was irritated that things had become more complicated than she had thought. Seeing this situation, she asked her partner if it wouldn't be better to back off. However, Blow didn't want to give up the mission because of some idiot. Seeing the protagonist's language, Ren was surprised. But putting that aside, she just hoped things would turn out well, as she couldn't stop him. In the hall, some mages were waiting for things to get exciting since a mana stone of such high grade had appeared. But with Sika's appearance, most of their will to fight disappeared. Even with many mages present, they knew that attacking would be difficult. It seemed pointless, as someone from the association was at a much higher level than they were. They could only imagine that the black mage, who had recently emerged, might have a chance. As the mages conversed, Tessiana walked through the hall. People were shocked to see the direction she was heading. At the top of the statue, Sik was still waiting. After so long, he tried to provoke the black mage again. "You're not afraid, are you? Is this some kind of hide and seek?" Down below, Lanoste was completely irritated with Sike. Shouting, he demanded that his companion stop his madness and come down immediately. However, Sik didn't want to listen to that old man, telling him to go away and leave him alone. Being provoked, Lanoste was ready to show Sik what hell was like. At that moment, as the two were arguing, a blue energy surged in the hall, catching both their attention. A crack appeared in the statue, which in an instant was brought down by a powerful blow. Seeing the statue fall in his direction, Lanoste was shocked. Falling without any resistance, the statue exploded in the middle of the hall. On top of the fallen statue stood a woman. Holding her sword, Lady Tessiana was ready to restore order. Not recognizing her, Lanoste aggressively asked what she was doing. Tessiana's expression was emotionless as she replied to the hunting dog, "I'm here to participate in the auction. I even brought a silver coin." Lanoste was surprised and irritated by the paltry amount of money the woman possessed. Completing her sentence, Tessiana showed hostility in her voice as she looked at Sik. "However, you're in my way." Sike didn't hide his hostility, returning it. "No, You're the one who's in the way. You crazy woman? Ren didn't know where the blue-haired woman had come from. She didn't know how long the woman could hold her own against the duo, but she knew it could be a chance for them. Looking at the protagonist to see if he agreed, Ren saw Blow standing on the railing. The protagonist confirmed Ren's thought. However, his eyes weren't on Tessiana or Sikwe, but on a man flirting with a young woman. He had finally found the target of his revenge mission. Energy explosions collided as Tessiana attacked Sikwe, who was retreating hastily. With her sword in hand, she leaped above her opponent to strike him with the force of gravity. Her attack was launched, aiming for the middle of the red-haired man who didn't try to dodge. Raising his hand, Sikwe effortlessly held Tessiana's sword. Before the shocked woman, Sikwe sighed. Why do these nobodies always show up to irritate my nerves? Holding the sword with one hand, Sikwe created an energy sphere with the other. The energy sphere hit Tessiana before she had a chance to evade, sending the lady flying across the hall with the strong impact. Lady Tessiana crashed into one of the walls of the hall, creating a large cloud of dust from the debris. However, looking at the dust cloud, Sikwe was shocked. Inside the dust cloud, the woman rose again. Leaning on her sword, she expressed her anger at being called a nobody. My name is Tessiana. Sikwe frowned upon realizing from Tessiana's voice that she was perfectly fine. Tessiana's eyes began to shine with a deep blue. Overflowing with energy, the mage activated her awakening. Sikwe scoffed, asking the woman if she really thought her awakening would change anything. Surrounded by a frozen aura, Tessiana gave her final warning. You'd better get ready. In an instant, Tessiana crossed the entire hall, attacking Sikwe. Seeing Tessiana awaken, the princess celebrated excitedly. Seeing how Tessiana, who had been brought as a guard, acted this way, the butler warned the princess that they should leave. The butler reminded the princess that they had already left in secret, and if anything happened to her, he would be the one punished. Noticing how things were starting to get chaotic, the butler urged the princess to accept leaving before the situation worsened. The mages and nobles in the hall were desperate. They wanted to evacuate, wanted to know what was happening, and wanted to know about the Mana Stone all at once, causing great confusion. Seeing people talking about the Mana Stone, Lanost tried to break through the crowd's blockade. He was furious with Sikwe, who had started fighting without handing over the Mana Stone, forcing him to search for it. Amidst the confusion, a person walked calmly, covered by a white cloth. This person was watching a man with shoulder-length hair embracing a young woman. This person was none other than Blow, who, seeing so many people focused on the Mana Stone, found a perfect opportunity amidst the chaos. He was wondering how he should reveal the mark on that man's leg. However, the only idea that came to his mind was to tear his pants off. Trying to think of another way but unable to think of anything else, he remembered his master. Hearing a man looking for the Mana Stone, the protagonist's attention was piqued. Approaching that man, he asked him to come closer, only to whisper in his ear, I saw that guy in purple clothes hiding the Mana Stone. Looking at where the protagonist was pointing, the man asked to confirm if the young man was talking about the man smiling next to a young woman. The protagonist confirmed his target, also stating that he had hidden the Mana Stone in his pants. In an instant, the man, believing the protagonist's words, attacked the mission target, demanding that he hand over the hidden Mana Stone. The commotion caught the attention of several people, who attacked the target. The protagonist couldn't believe his plan had worked. However, the mission target retaliated against the people around him, drawing a sword. Frowning, his anger was provoked. Bastards! How the hell did they find out? The protagonist was surprised, as were the people around, who now realized that the man had indeed taken the Mana Stone. Now holding the Mana Stone, the mage prepared to hand it over. Releasing his energy, he prepared to cast the mage's magic. My name is Klauke, Awakening. In a minute, energy overflowed powerfully from the target's body. Raising his hand, he created several energy orbs, showing a manic smile. Listen carefully, you insects. The Mana Stone is already in my hands. Anyone who tries to covet it will face me. Immediately after the threat, Clockway launched an attack at the mages who had tried to attack him. However, the attack was broken by a sword surrounded by dark energy. With no options left, the protagonist attacked Clock personally. Clock tried to defend himself, but the outcome was clear. The sword in his hand was knocked away, and before him stood the black mage pointing his sword at him. With a cold look, the protagonist responded to Cloakway's threat. Very unlikely. As soon as the protagonist released his energy, it was felt by Sikwe. He diverted his gaze from Tessiana, looking in the direction of the black mage. Tessiana seized the opportunity to attack. She rushed forward, closing the distance between them. On the other side of the hall, Cloque fell to the ground as he tried to retreat. The people around, seeing the dark magic, were surprised, realizing who its bearer was. Lanost was also surprised to see that magic. astonished to recognize the black mage. Cloque was furious, refusing to give up the mana stone, claiming the item as his. The protagonist almost laughed at such a joke. How exactly is it yours? You stole it, and in any case, I'm not after it, but you. Before the protagonist could attack Cloque, he felt a powerful energy. He diverted his gaze and, looking to the side, saw a large attack coming in his direction. As the protagonist recoiled to dodge the attack, he realized it was a sword. Frowning, he noticed that the person attacking him was not giving up, coming towards him. In an instant, the protagonist saw his pursuer before him. Seek grabbed the protagonist's shirt, shortening the distance between their faces. "Hello, Blackie," the protagonist sighed upon seeing Sikamoon, the man who was obstructing his mission. Without giving the black mage a chance to escape, Seek threw him to the ground with all his energy, causing a powerful explosion that sent debris flying in all directions. Seeing the fight shift locations, nobles and mages tried to flee. The few people who had the courage to look on watched as the smoke began to dissipate elsewhere in the hall. Tessiana, who had been counterattacked, got up, complaining about the pain she felt. Pounding the ground, she was furious because her sword had been stolen. Her eyes reflected a fierce determination, as she swore that next time she would not lose. Cloque took the opportunity while the black mage was attacked to flee with the mana stone. The other mages who had heard he was in possession of the mana stone pursued him, trying to prevent his escape. Irritated by such small fish, Cloque conjured an attack. Launching an energy sphere, he hit the group pursuing him. He couldn't help but mock those damned weaklings who stood in his way. Unbeknownst to Cloque, someone appeared behind him. "Mage, surely you don't think there are only weaker mages here, do you?" That woman attacked Cloque, who in a swift move put his hands in front of his body to block. Immediately, several powerful mages who had been hiding appeared to hunt for the mana stone. In an instant, the exit of the hall was filled with mages, all surrounding Cloque. The mage gritted his teeth, seeing that he was cornered. Inside, the people were euphoric to discover that the black mage was fighting against Sikamuon. Even the prince was surprised to hear who was fighting. Realizing how dangerous it was and that the building could collapse if the fight continued, the prince searched for his father. However, his father had disappeared a long time ago. Looking at the young Rune behind the seat where his father had been, the prince asked where he was. Without much emotion, Rune revealed that His Excellency had fled a long time ago. The young prince realized he should also escape, but something caught his attention. This was a battle between powerful mages. He didn't want to miss the opportunity to witness it for anything. On the other hand, Ren was desperate to see how the situation had turned out. She couldn't believe that this Sequay from the association had shown up. He had been a miscalculation. She hadn't brought a mana orb for recharges, as the mission was supposed to be low risk, and she was worried that the fight would drag on, making things worse for Blow. Concerned, she wondered what plan he had. Before Sike, the protagonist was prepared. Facing the mage from the association, he tried to make it clear that he had no intention of fighting him. Seek smiled, unwilling to believe it. However, Blow confirmed his initial words. "Yes, my goal is not the mana stone, and yours must be to guard it until the auction is over, right? Judging by what your ally said, it seems so. So let's just take care of our own business and deal with that ridiculous magic circle above your head." As Blow had said, Seek had conjured a huge crimson magic circle. Provoking the protagonist, Seek asked if he didn't like his magic. "Whatever your goal is, I don't care. Since that day, I've been looking for you. Ophion has been busy hiding you like some kind of treasure, so I've been chasing every mission or incident where you showed up. Still, I couldn't find you." Obviously, Blow knew why the man hadn't found him, as his missions were no more impressive than just getting a few autographs. However, Seek was distraught at seeing the black mage before him. Therefore, he advanced without caring. In the face of Seek's advance, the protagonist used his long sword to block him. Approaching the protagonist, looking him in the eyes, Seek asked him to show it again. That day, the black mage had given him such a cold look that it had sent chills down his spine. Seek used all his energy to create his most powerful attacks. He didn't care about everything around him, forcing the black mage to comply with his wishes. With Seek's powerful attack launched, people panicked as the building trembled as if it would collapse. Rocks, slabs, and pillars flew in all directions. However, Lanost was still there to cover for his partner's mistakes, saving the innocents caught in the conflict. Lanost was furious with the bastard who seemed to be destroying the whole place. What made him even angrier was that Sike had become a chatterbox, starting to enjoy himself. Looking around, Lanosta observed how the auction had turned into chaos, remembering that he needed to recover the mana stone at all costs. Outside, Cloque's fight was interrupted when a pillar fell in front of him for no apparent reason. Looking back, he wondered what the hell they were doing to make pieces of the building fly like that. Taking advantage of Cloquet's distraction, a mage attacked him, demanding that he hand over the hidden mana stone. Cloquet managed to be quick, dodging the attack from 4 other mages at once. At that moment, the man who had spoken with the protagonist earlier shouted, "In his pants! It's in his pants! The mana stone is inside his pants!" Cloquet was taken aback, not understanding why they were saying something so nonsensical. However, the words of that man turned everyone into zombies. Staring at Cloquet's pants as the most tempting target, Cloquet stepped back, trying to assert that it was a lie, telling them to stay away from him. Inside, a solitary figure stood amidst the smoke. Seek held a cloak in his hand, but, unfortunately for him, the owner of that cloak had vanished. The protagonist jumped to one of the auction boxes. There, he surprised 2 women. Putting a finger to his lips, he whispered, "Calmly get out of here, this place is dangerous." Shocked by how handsome the black mage was, the duo obeyed his advice and left. Looking down at the situation, the protagonist sighed, remembering how ridiculous Sikwe Muon was. The man had made him spend a large part of his mana in a senseless fight. Thinking about it, the protagonist realized that because of Sike, his master had started giving him all sorts of strange missions since that day. Seeing how most people had evacuated, and the chaos that had ensued, the protagonist deemed this mission a failure. However, he still wanted to confirm if the target had a mark, so he moved again. Siko, who was at the center of the auction, had no intention of giving up. Since the black mage didn't want to fight, he would force him to want to. Looking around, Seek noticed several people he could use as distractions. A dark thought crossed his mind. If he got rid of all the insects around, perhaps the black mage would change his mind. Suddenly people began to look up. Their faces were shocked. No one could believe what was happening. Above them, a crimson magic circle, as large as the auction hall, had been created. Looking up, even Cloquet wondered what the hell was happening to create such a thing. The mages seeking the mana stone seized the opportunity to attack Cloquet, who tried to stop them, telling them to look up. Cloquet couldn't believe these lunatics didn't even care about that attack. However, he still believed that if he kept running, he could escape. But an attack hit Cloquet squarely, sending him flying back through the group pursuing him. That attack had been launched by the protagonist. With a serious look, Blow ordered everyone to leave the area immediately. The mages were shocked to encounter the black mage. Not caring how shocked they were, the protagonist gave them a warning. "If you value your lives more than the mana stone, you better leave this place immediately. This is a place that could collapse at any moment." Seeing the large magic circle, Lanost ran to his partner Sike. "What are you doing? Stop that right now. Can't you see there are still people here? Are you planning to hit everyone who couldn't get out?" Despite Lanost's words, Sike remained silent. Ren tried to escape this total mess. Running through the upper floor of the auction, she searched for Blow so they could leave immediately with a teleportation scroll. She urgently wanted to get out of there, as a sinister feeling hung in the air. The person Ren was looking for was now in front of Klako. The bandit was trying to back away hurriedly to distance himself from the powerful mage. "It seems you can't trust rumors. I didn't think the dark mage would be a greedy guy. Are you planning to send everyone away to take the magic stone for yourself?" The protagonist couldn't understand why people only saw what they wanted. With a cold look, he stared at the mage in front of him, who was shocked to hear the dark mage ask if he belonged to the Kodal organization. Cloquet frowned, trying to deny it, but the protagonist pointed out the facts. The reward for him was substantial, and even as time passed, Cloquet seemed intent on maintaining his operations in Rodden. With every word spoken by the dark mage, Cloquet grew more furious. Judging by Cloquet's reactions, the protagonist assumed he was right, but still needed to confirm to be sure. To try to save himself, Cloak grabbed the magic stone, extending his hands to offer it to the dark mage. The protagonist was surprised to see that Cloaky actually had the stone. He was about to say he didn't want it when an attack struck the mage with the stone. With the powerful attack, Cloquet sank into the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The person who had made the attack climbed on top of Cloaky, addressing the protagonist and reminding him that he had said he wasn't interested in the magic stone. "If you're not after it, what's the point of dealing with trash like this?" With Sika's question, the two exchanged deep glances. The protagonist was about to ask them to talk first, but Sik didn't listen, launching into an attack immediately, frustrating the protagonist as he realized he wouldn't be able to have an appropriate conversation. When he tried to pull away, Sik managed to grab his foot after a quick attack. Spinning his body, he threw the protagonist against a wall, demolishing another part of the auction. Seeing how the dark mage had released his energy again, Sik asked him to at least play with him a little. Immediately after the request, Sik charged again, With little alternative, the protagonist did the same, approaching the association mage in the air. However, before they could meet, their energies vanished, leaving them shocked. With their attacks cancelled, they fell back to the auction floor. The protagonist looked at his own hands, remembering how his concentrated energy had suddenly disappeared. Seeing Seek finally stop his attacks, Lanost ran towards his partner to reprimand him. However, looking to the side, he was surprised. A magic circle had suddenly appeared. After the first appearance, a new magic circle appeared, followed by a third. Quickly, several magic circles covered almost the entire auction. No one understood why a magic circle had appeared, much less so many identical ones. However, from one of the magic circles, something began to rise like a block of ice. A creaking sound like laughter also rose, and what seemed to be a block of ice took the form of a giant monster with numerous eyes and a huge row of teeth. Desperate, people tried to flee from the monster. The young girl who was with her young master also tried to urgently get him out of there. However, he was more interested in knowing where the monster had come from. Rune tried to explain that the monster had emerged from a magic circle, but at least the young man already knew that. The monster approached some people with one of its large tentacles. Seeing that those people wouldn't be able to save themselves, the blonde young man asked Rune for his sword. She wanted to warn her young master of the danger, but he already knew that his abilities might not be enough. Still, for him, standing still like an idiot wouldn't make things better. Recovering his sword, the young man advanced in front of the duo being attacked. Trying to calm them to protect them, the young man was hit by the monster's tentacle and thrown into the air while losing consciousness. Seeing what had happened, the young Rune jumped, catching her young master in the air and safely returning to the ground. Facing the monster that had attacked her young master, she wondered what she should call it, suggesting that the monster could be named Giant Octopus because of its tentacles. Deciding how to name the monster, Rune began to conjure small spells. Absorption, mana arrow. Rising up, she created a golden bow and arrow by merging the two spells. With the shot of the golden arrow, the octopus was hit, losing one of its tentacles. Surprisingly, the tentacle fell close to Lanost, who didn't understand what the hell was happening there. Approaching the dark mage and revealing his confusion, he was asked if he didn't think the monsters had appeared from summoning circles. Hearing the dark mage's reasoning, Lanost realized it made sense. Delving deeper into the topic, the protagonist asked if there were mages capable of summoning monsters, but Lanost didn't know any. This raised questions for Blow, who wondered how so many giant creatures had been summoned. Finally, finding Blow, Ren ran towards him. The protagonist was surprised she hadn't escaped yet, causing Ren to frown. "What are you talking about? I couldn't just leave without any loyalty?" Lanost was surprised to see that the dark mage had an ally from Ophion, and moreover, someone who wasn't a mage. Putting that aside, the hunting dog turned to Sika, who had his back to a monster. With a raise of his arm, Sika unleashed the power of a spell, completely destroying that monster. Being hit by several pieces of tentacles, Lanost was surprised but quickly asked where the magic stone was. Not caring much, Sika revealed that it had been lost. Lanost couldn't believe such a thing, as Sika had it just a moment ago. Sika indeed had the stone in his hand, but it had disappeared without him noticing. Irritated, Ren grabbed the teleportation scroll to use it, calling Blow to leave that insane place. The protagonist approached Ren, but someone didn't want him to leave. Seek quickly closed the distance between them, grabbing the protagonist's sword so he wouldn't go away. Ren was furious with the madman who appeared before her. What are you doing in this situation?" Turning to Lanosta, he hastily asked him to deal with his companion. This time, drawing his sword, the protagonist didn't see his energy disappear. Believing that it had been a temporary phenomenon, he asked Sika if he had felt the same thing. Sika confirmed that it had indeed happened, assuming that it hadn't been the dark mage's doing, as the monsters started appearing at the same moment. With this situation, with so many monsters around, the protagonist stated that it wasn't the time to fight. However, Sika was inflexible. He didn't care about the things around him. Proving this was true, he attacked the protagonist again right in front of Ren, but this time Lanost intervened, positioning himself between the two. The association's dog had followed Ren's commands. "Stop, Sike. Sticky men are not attractive at all." Hearing Lanost's words, Ren was shocked. Showing the chaos they had caused, Lanost stated that the mage tower would arrive soon, reminding them that nothing good would come from going against them. Still, Sike refused to back down. "Leave. Even if you're an old man, I won't forgive anyone who interferes." The protagonist couldn't believe how crazy Sike Moon was. Ren was about to confirm Lanosta's words about the mage tower when a tentacle emerged behind her. With someone shouting a warning, Ren was stunned. At that moment, A young blonde man ran towards Ren to save her from that tentacle. The young master's sword managed to strike the monster, which, feeling the pain of the stab, roared with its enormous mouth. The young blonde looked seriously at Ren, asking if she was okay. However, Ren was shocked. The young man who was supposed to save her had been grabbed by the monster, which took him to its mouth. Rune coldly asked her young master if he wanted help. Desperate, he shouted for her to assist him. Instantly, an attack struck the monster, splitting it in two as if it were a piece of bread. The young man was saved, although he fell heavily to the ground, as Rune didn't catch him this time. Climbing on top of the monster, the protagonist checked if Ren was okay. With that attack, the protagonist confirmed that the monster was of low tier, lacking a core or intelligence. He didn't understand who could summon something like that. Rune approached her young master, asking if he was all right, but he only cared to look in the direction of the dark mage. Looking the other way, he was surprised to see Sikemon as well, who was being grabbed by his partner. Seeing such mages up close, the young man could feel their strength. Not leaving yet, the protagonist looked in one direction. There lay Cloquet's body. He still hadn't confirmed anything yet, which the mission required. Approaching the protagonist, who was looking at Cloquet, Ren finally realized that she had forgotten about that stupid mission. Remembering the nightmares she had, she felt relieved to have brought the teleportation scroll with her. Distancing himself from the girl, the protagonist asked Ren to escape first. Ren was incredulous. "What? Are you serious? Are you really going to take his pants off?" Ren's question echoed through the auction, making people doubt their own ears. The protagonist quickly corrected Ren about what he intended to do. He meant to eliminate the monsters and save the people. Ren thought Blow's decision was stupid, as the tower could handle it. Realizing there was something else important, he called the young blonde, who looked surprised. Ren didn't think this would be a good way to repay what he had done, but she asked if he would like to leave with them since the teleportation scroll could handle 4 people. Hearing that he could go with Ren, the young man became excited. Ren didn't hear an immediate response, so she thought he wouldn't go, but he quickly accepted to go with her, even though Rune also had some teleportation scrolls. On the other hand, Lenost was already having a headache. Dealing with his partner and thinking about the report he would need to write, he knew he was in trouble, especially because of Sike. Lenost's companion was inflexible. Throwing his head back, he struck Lenost's chin. As Sike freed himself, Ren used the magic of the teleportation scroll. "The location where I desire. The condition is those I touch." Quickly, the protagonist instructed the others to hold on to him. However, it was at that moment they heard an enraged voice nearby. "Really, this is so damn annoying. Why are you running away? Where's that arrogant guy from before?" Sike was releasing a large amount of energy as he approached the group. Seeing such a threat, the young blonde trembled from head to toe. Approaching the protagonist, he commented that the mage there seemed to be looking at him with a very scary gaze. The protagonist told the young man not to worry about the crazy guy. Despite this, he tried to hurry Ren, who was trying to concentrate and not talk to him. Overflowing with energy, Sike had no intention of letting the dark mage escape. With all his hatred, he created a giant magic circle below the auction ceiling, frightening even the mindless monsters. Lanoste couldn't believe his partner was going to try using that magic again. The young blonde looked up, remembering that the magic circle was the same as some time ago. The protagonist tried to hurry Ren again, but he was already giving it his all. Finally, she reached the end of the scroll's use. "What I desire is teleport!" A gigantic explosion occurred in the auction, creating a fireball dozens of meters high, illuminating the dark night like a sun. In a forest on the outskirts of the city, a person was holding a small magic circle above their hand. Seeing the large fireball, they closed their hand, dissipating the magic. The man with a small octopus on his shoulder found the act quite amusing, asking a person sitting on a nearby branch if they didn't think the same. The girl sitting on the branch, named Ruby Monter, held a small book in one hand. In the other, she had the magic stone that had disappeared from the auction. Frowning, she stared at her partner with her golden eyes, disagreeing with him. The girl held the mana stone, obtained from the chaos, and with a light squeeze shattered it. Dropping the pieces of the mana stone like confetti, she expressed her disdain. Humans are such lamentably trivial creatures. Back in Ophion, Rude's master read a report. The auction house had been destroyed, the magic stone had vanished, and unknown monsters had appeared. He couldn't help but smile at the magnitude of the spectacle. However, Ren's gaze made him stop smiling. The woman immediately gave him a lecture. "It's amusing, considering you just sent us there to drop our pants, putting us into chaos that barely allowed us to return unscathed." With her complaint, the master asserted he was glad the duo was okay. That was the least Ren expected. The master sighed, stating that if he had known Sikemuun would be at the auction, he wouldn't have sent them there. Ren didn't understand why the guy kept pursuing Blow as if it were not just a fight but something more behind it. Without telling the whole truth, the master merely commented that the Muon family tended to be a bit crazy. Despite the doubt in Ren's eyes, the master claimed that naturally Sik would lose interest, so until then, they just needed to avoid him. Ren could understand that, to avoid Sik, the master was assigning Blow to strange missions. Putting the topic aside, the master returned to the report, which contained something that didn't fit. He already found it strange when he discovered that the high-grade magic stone was being advertised for a public auction. However, a mass monster summoning and the sudden disappearance of magic were not something that could be ignored. Ren noted that the association and the tower were making a big deal out of it, which was normal. Still, the master didn't understand how Blow had submitted such a report and then disappeared. He wondered where the young Rude was. The person in question was reading some books. Just as he had thought, there were no records about monster summoning. It seemed that discovering the truth with conventional data would be difficult. Breaking the protagonist's concentration, a young boy brought him the drink he had ordered. The little boy, named Ben, greeted Rude, someone he hadn't seen in a long time. Ben had never seen Rude busy studying, which made him curious about why the protagonist had so many books. To hide the subject, Rude merely stated he was curious about something. Still, Ben was startled, as Rude was reading many things, especially on such complicated topics. Ben finally realized that Rude might be intelligent. The protagonist gave a small pat on the boy's head upon seeing him just now discover this. Seeing how Rude boasted about his intelligence, he remembered that his sister always said people should stay humble. Putting that aside, the protagonist looked around, noticing that there were many customers, which must keep Ben busy. However, the boy didn't find it too complicated, as most people spent their time chatting rather than placing orders. Changing the subject, Ben asked the protagonist if he had heard about the feats of the Dark Wizard. Hearing the boy mention him, Rude became restless. Thinking Rude was interested, Ben began narrating the stories. There was a super expensive magic stone at the auction in Ravi, and some evil wizards tried to steal it. But then the Dark Wizard appeared and boom! He defeated them all, saving everyone. The protagonist didn't think it happened exactly that way, as the place ended up in ruins. But he didn't want to spoil the boy's happiness. Ben couldn't help but smile hopefully, wishing that his sister would become at least a little as powerful as the Dark Wizard. Rude didn't know that Ben had a sister. Proudly, Ben revealed that his sister had entered Helios. Thinking about the name, the protagonist asked if he was talking about the school. However, Ben explained properly. Helios is not just a school. Helios is an amazing and super special place where only the best of the best can enter. Despite being happy for his sister, Ben was sad that they had separated. However, there was nothing to be done, just writing letters when he missed her. Ben's mother didn't send all the letters to avoid distracting her daughters, but Ben revealed he had already written 10 of them. While the boy chattered about Helios and his sister, a woman shouted his name. Seeing his mother calling him, Ben wished the protagonist good luck with his studies and ran to see her. Left alone, the protagonist sighed. He then closed his eyes, focusing. His concentration spread throughout the tavern, allowing him to hear what people were talking about. In one corner, a man said that Sikamoon had won, but next to him, a woman said that the Dark Wizard was focused on saving people. Another man at the same table commented that the explosion must have been caused by the tower. At another table, they talked about Cluck, who had stolen the magic stone, while at a third table, they commented that the Dark Wizard was actually a woman. The protagonist was shocked by all the rumors circulating, but none about a certain person who should take the blame. Still, as there was no mention of the monsters, the protagonist believed that the tower had somehow covered up the story. That was what should have been done, as monsters had appeared within a city protected by the tower's barrier. Thinking about it, the protagonist wondered if there was a problem with the barrier. However, he dismissed that thought, as things wouldn't be so calm if that were the case. Looking at the drawing of the magic circle he had made, the protagonist wondered if he could find a clue with it. Not knowing where to start, he decided to go talk to the master. There was a city surrounded by a forest. In its center, a castle exuded an elegant and noble charm. A man with golden hair wearing a white hood had arrived in the city. Someone asked him Rispan why they had stopped, to which he replied that there was some commotion up ahead but nothing to worry about. Looking at the carriage, he asked the woman inside, Dana, if she was sure about what she was doing. However, the elegant Dana reminded him that she had already answered that question several times. Seeing the man worry, she asked him to listen carefully. If this helps that child even a little, I will do anything. While Dana spoke with Rispan, Rude walked through the city. Even looking at the magic circle on the paper, he had no answers or ideas on what to do. In a brief moment of distraction, the wind took the paper from his hand. He quickly ran after the paper, which, with another gust of wind, was carried away again. The paper took flight, soaring above the short route and rising to a height he couldn't reach. He ran through the cobblestone streets, wondering how long that paper would fly. In a random place, a man was shouting desperately, "Please give it back to me!" However, the group refused to return the abandoned backpack they had found, but the man insisted that he hadn't abandoned his backpack. He had just set it aside for a moment. He begged them to return it. The leader of the group grabbed the man by his shirt, pulling him close. With a delinquent look, he didn't hesitate to threaten the man in broad daylight. "You know what? Even if you beg on your knees, I won't give it back. So how dare you raise your voice at me? Think carefully. Would the guards get here first, or would your body fall before that?" In the midst of the threat, the thug was hit in the face by a piece of paper. Releasing the man and throwing the paper to the ground, he wondered what the hell that was. Returning to the subject, he informed that the backpack was now his. At that moment, something caught the man's attention. A young boy had picked up the paper that had hit his face, complaining that it had gotten dirty. Frowning, the thug asked who that kid was. He and his henchmen were startled, as the boy had also grabbed the stolen bag. The protagonist returned the bag to its owner as if nothing had happened. The group of thugs didn't understand how the bag had been taken, so the protagonist looked in their direction, revealing that he was the one who had taken it. Seizing the opportunity, the owner of the bag immediately fled. However, the leader of the thugs didn't want to chase after him. Grinding his teeth, a small aura emanated from him. "That little bastard. I need to correct his attitude first. Block the exits." Seeing that the man was a magic user, the protagonist assessed that he must be at the lowest level. Snapping his fingers, the thug approached the protagonist. "Hey, kid, you still don't know how this world works. As an adult, I'm going to teach you a big lesson." Rude didn't want to cause trouble, so he wondered what to do. Making a decision, he tried to run. The group of thugs was surprised to see the boy flee. With just one jump, Rude leaped over a building, landing in the street beside it. However, in the midst of his fall, the protagonist found himself facing a carriage. Sensing a presence, Rispan looked up, and their eyes met. Inside the carriage, Dana only heard a noise, which made her wonder what had happened. Everyone around the carriage was shocked. On top of the carriage was a small blonde boy who had fallen from the sky. Rude smiled peacefully. "Phew, this carriage is really sturdy." The people surrounding the carriage couldn't believe the boy's words. They were all left speechless until Rude jumped from the roof of the carriage, landed on the street, and quickly fled. The people looked in the direction of the fleeing child and then noticed that Rispan had started to move. The guard quickly advanced toward the protagonist, placing a sword over his shoulder. "Stop right there!" Rude looked back to see the swift man catching up to him. Behind Rude, the knight in luxurious robes asked if he knew whose carriage he had just stepped on. Quickly stepping back, the protagonist bowed. "I don't know, but I apologize. I didn't realize it was someone important's carriage, and even if I had no choice, I shouldn't have done that." Rispan's eyes widened at the sincerity in the young boy's apology. "I sincerely apologize for startling you. I will be more careful in the future, so could you let this slide just this once?" Faced with such polite and sincere words, Rispan could no longer press him and accepted his apology. Immediately, the protagonist thanked him and left while he had the chance. One of Rispan's companions couldn't help but laugh at her companion, who didn't know what to do. Remembering how the young boy had apologized, she asked how Rispan could draw a sword on a child. Rispan scoffed at his companion's words, recalling how the young boy had fallen from such a high place and still landed perfectly. To him, this was not a child that could be considered ordinary. The companion urged Rispan not to act as if that were normal. He himself had defeated many mid-level monsters at the same age as that young boy. Thinking of the young boy, the woman felt he would be a talent with a bright future. With that in mind, she suggested that Rispan take him on as his disciple. The idea from his companion made Rispan give her a threatening look. While the woman was teasing Rispan, Dana stepped down from the carriage, interested in what they were discussing. The elegant woman had the impression that Rude was both strong and intelligent. Seeing Dana agree with her, the knight gave a bright smile, suggesting that they recruit him for the magic troupe. Hearing his companion's idea, Rispan pulled his hair, eliciting a laugh from Dana. Concerned, Rispan asked if Dana had been hurt from the impact in the carriage, but Dana was fine, as the carriage was indeed sturdy. Shifting to a more important topic, Dana commented that they were already close to their destination, and since the weather was nice, it would be interesting to take a walk. Since this was Dana's wish, Rispan agreed. As the trio conversed, someone was watching them. Rude was hiding behind a pillar, looking at Dana. From what he could see, he believed the woman must be a noble. That man, on the other hand, seemed to be someone incredibly skilled. In any case, he considered himself lucky to have gotten out of that situation without problems. The protagonist sighed heavily. Lately, he had really been having bad luck. Despite that, he felt relieved that he wouldn't encounter that noblewoman again. However, Rude couldn't have been more wrong. Arriving at their destination, he found Dana, along with Rispan and his companion behind her. Sitting across from each other, a strange atmosphere settled in. Asking his master why they were there, the protagonist inquired if he could stay outside. However, the master didn't allow him to go, as the woman was a client. Interested in Rude, Dana asked the master who the young boy was. Not knowing they had already met before, the master tried to favor Rude's side, although it left him angry. Oh yes, he may seem small and insignificant, but he is one of the greatest talents in Ophion. Seeing how young Rude looked, Dana asked if he had the wizard certificate to be part of Ophion. The master confirmed that Rude had a certificate, asserting that although he was a 7th-tier wizard, a complete novice, he was the best among his peers. The protagonist didn't understand why the hell his master spoke so poorly of him, but he decided to let it go. Taking a drink, Dana commented that Ophion seemed to have many talents. Even in the streets, people only talked about the dark mage of Ophion, spreading rumors that he was incredible. Since she was there, Dana stated that she would like to meet such a person from the rumors. However, Master Ophion stated that unfortunately the dark mage had gone on a mission. Not only was Dana frustrated, but so was her guard. Diverting the conversation, Dana looked at the protagonist and finally commented that they had met again. The master didn't understand what Dana meant, as he was unaware of the earlier incident. Realizing her mistake, Dana remarked that, in fact, Rude had never truly seen her, stating that she was the owner of the carriage he had fallen on. Hearing Dana's words, the master stared at the protagonist, trying to investigate the matter. With her eyes closed in melancholy, Dana commented that it must have been fate that brought them together again. Placing her cup back on the table, she turned to Master Ophion. "This child seems quite trustworthy." Seeing Rude receive a compliment, the master was surprised. He immediately thanked her. "Thank you for speaking so highly of him, Duchess of Artian." Discovering the woman's title, the protagonist was astonished. He had suspected she was a noble, but he would never have guessed she was from a ducal house. Dana wanted to get straight to the point. As Master Ophion already knew, the true reason for Dana's long journey there was indeed because of her second son, who was currently in Helios. With the little that the Duchess had said, Master Ophion already had an idea of what the matter was about. Dana confirmed her request. To summarize, her second son was having difficulties with his school life. Calling her guard, Fran, Dana asked for the documents. The guard handed over the list of students at Helios and the report on the current internal situation. Hearing about Helios, the protagonist realized that he had heard that name many times in a single day. Dana explained that only a month had passed since her son entered Helios. Although she didn't know what had happened in that short period, apparently her son was being called a monster at school. The master didn't believe that anyone would dare to speak like that to Artian's second son. Dana explained that her son was not the only noble there. As everyone knew, once a student entered Helios, external interference was not allowed, and now it was too late to withdraw the young man from school. Dana couldn't help but feel depressed thinking about her fragile son, someone who would easily become lonely. Since childhood, all the attention and love had been taken by his older brother, causing him to grow up alone and isolated. Even though Dana couldn't give him all the attention he deserved because of how busy she was, her son had already become a fragile child who couldn't even reveal the wounds in his heart. All Dana wanted was for her son not to get hurt anymore. Above all, she couldn't tolerate her family's son being treated like that in such a place. Dana made a simple request. She wanted help for her son to have a peaceful school life there. Her son, who was being called a monster and suffering, she wanted Ophion to protect him. After being alone with Master Ophion, the protagonist ordered him to explain everything. The master pretended not to understand, leaving Rude extremely furious. "What do you mean you don't know what you have to explain? Of course I'm talking about this ridiculous and absurd situation you've gotten us into." Smiling, the master affirmed that it was exactly what Rude had heard. The Duchess's request was precisely that, and he would be the one to fulfill it. The protagonist couldn't believe that this ridiculous mission would be passed on to him. "Forget the request for a second. How could you present me like that? And what was that about me being ranked 7th? Master Ophion didn't understand what Rude wanted him to do. It wasn't as if he could introduce him as the Black Mage. The man was already surprised enough to have made them believe that Rude was a certified mage. The protagonist couldn't believe that his master wasn't listening to what he was saying. The best option would be not to introduce him. The master asked Rude to stay calm since even in this great school of magic, the students were just novices who hadn't awakened yet, just apprentices. The protagonist was furious that his master treated the situation as if he had already accepted the mission. Rude remembered that he hadn't received Ren's report, which showed that they needed to investigate what was happening. Despite Rude trying to evade the mission at Helios, the master asked him not to worry about anything else and to focus on the mission. Taking a folder, Master Ophion handed it to Rude. Upon opening that folder, the protagonist discovered an admission letter to Helios in his name. Seeing the letter, he froze. Somberly, he asked if it was some kind of joke. Seeing Rude return the admission letter, the master quickly asked him to let him explain. The protagonist looked deeply at the master. "Our relationship ends here." Grabbing his backpack, the protagonist said goodbye. "Master, thank you for everything. It was a lot of fun, but from this moment on, I bid farewell to the Ophion team." Master Ophion was desperate. He ran to grab the protagonist. "No way! Absolutely not! Do you have any idea how much effort, care, and food I invested in you? How can you do this to me?" The protagonist couldn't believe that the master was saying such things. How can you do this with my things without telling me anything?" The master knew that Rude would obviously reject it if he said anything, and the reason was obvious. Rude didn't want to go to school because there was nothing for him to learn there. The master reminded him that he wasn't going there to learn, but for a mission. However, Rude refused to accept such a request. Desperate, the master held his hand. "You really don't understand. Even if you have to go so far, I just want to send you to a school. Like a vast ocean, my love for you is immense." Rude didn't understand what was wrong with his master, who was speaking nonsense. To interrupt the soap opera scene, Ren entered the office, asking what they were doing. Embarrassed by having his important conversation interrupted, the master asked if Ren couldn't knock before entering. Reprimanded, Ren became tremendously irritated, asserting that she had knocked. Returning to the main topic, Ren ordered the two to sit down and stop being embarrassed in public. Discovering that Ren also knew about the matter, Rude felt betrayed. The young girl smiled awkwardly, asking him not to take it so seriously, as it could be like a little trip since the students would be seen as children by him. Remembering that the mission handed by the Duchess wouldn't be difficult, Ren urged him to use the opportunity to relax, experience school life, and make some friends his age. Hearing the suggestion, Rude fell silent. Finally, after thinking for a moment, he stated that he didn't need friends. Seeing how much Rude hated the idea, the master realized they couldn't do anything, even if this is a special mission given by the Duchess herself, who personally traveled all the way to Ophion to make the request. "If you refuse, then there's nothing to be done. Maybe I'll even lose my own head over this. Should I write my will?" The protagonist couldn't believe his master's lamentations. Putting on a performance worthy of a red carpet, Master Ophion took a cloth to wipe his tears. "It's okay, as long as it makes you feel better." Irritated, Ren gave the master a bump on the head to cut his nonsense. Addressing Rude, Ren agreed that it had been a mistake for the master to proceed without consulting him first, and since he had already been formally enrolled in the school, which would keep him there for a while, the decision should be made by him. Explaining how they would handle the situation, Ren asked for the boy's opinion. The room fell silent for a moment until Rude broke the ice again. "So basically, I just need to help the Duchess's second son, right?" The duo in front of the protagonist was shocked to see him accept. They couldn't help but celebrate. "That's right, the mission won't be difficult at all. As expected from the rising star of Ophion, you're amazing." Seeing that the two had already prepared everything in advance for his trip to school, the protagonist wondered if he should just run away. Handing over a stack of papers, the master revealed that although they had told the Duchess he was a 7th-rank mage, the school didn't know he was a certified awakened mage. The brief comment made the protagonist understand that he couldn't use his blow awakening at school. The master confirmed that was the issue, although it was fine since nothing too dangerous would happen at Helios. While Rude looked at the long list of materials, the master merely warned him to be a little careful with the teachers. In the end, he commented that this mission would be both a vacation trip for the Black Mage Blow and the first mission for Rude Chrissy. The protagonist couldn't face the master, seeing how he knew how to make things interesting. Still, Rude wondered how he should help this boy, questioning whether he should just teach a lesson to the kids who bothered him. The protagonist picked up a photo of a boy from the files, a boy with long hair and a frightening look. Rude thought of something. Placing the photo on the table, the protagonist asked if that was the person who was harassing the Duchess's second son. However, Master Ophion contradicted Rude's thoughts. In fact, that young man was Lyderkis Dien Artheon, the second son of the Artheon family, currently called a monster, and the one suffering at Helios. The afternoon sun was still able to illuminate the city. Inside a large building, Ben was surprised because the letters he had written could not be sent. The girl in front of the boy explained that Helios was a highly restricted place regarding external items, so without a certificate they couldn't accept it. Even though the boy wanted to send just one letter, the woman couldn't proceed. With no alternative, Ben asked where he could get a certificate. Knowing that Ben's sister was a student at Helios, the woman stated that she should have one, so he should ask his parents for it and then come back. However, Ben knew that wouldn't work since his mother had told him not to send letters. Facing the situation, Ben asked if she couldn't at least send one. Despite the boy's insistence, the woman couldn't do anything. At that moment, someone extended a certificate to help. Surprising Ben by appearing, the protagonist offered his own certificate to send the letter. The protagonist was there to ask for his things to be sent to Helios and took the opportunity to request that the letters be sent as well. This made Ben extremely excited. Looking at the poor boy, Rude took on the task of delivering the letters to his sister. The famous Helios school covered the horizon with its immense and luxurious expanse. All around, students circulated, dealing with their own problems. However, in the school corridors, a rumor had already spread. Apparently, a young man would be entering that day. Someone who had scored a perfect score on the entrance exam. The boy who had driven the teachers completely mad. Despite the comments, some thought it was too late to join the classes, but some rumors said he was arriving late due to a chronic illness. In the end, most decided to befriend him since they could ask for his help to boost their grades. Hearing the comments, a girl with white hair who just wanted peace hoped everyone would stay quiet. The students in that class were waiting for the next lesson. They looked to one corner of the room, seeing that the student Varus was sleeping again, and remembered that he had asked them to wake him up. While the boys talked, a group of girls gathered, one of them showing a badge she had won the day before. At that moment, a young man entered the room, drawing everyone's attention, and they fell silent as they stared at him. No one dared to say anything and just watched him. Slowly, he pulled his chair at the back of the room and sat down. However, breaking the silence, someone murmured, "Monster." Obviously, this person was referring to the young man who had entered the room, the second son of the Duchess, Lyderchus Dien Arthian. Incredibly, the girl with white hair took advantage of the silence in the room, while Lyderchus, the reason for the silence, lowered his head in his solitude. When the protagonist discovered that it had been noted in his documents that he had a chronic illness and that he had scored a perfect score, he was surprised. Master Ophion had difficulty explaining, so he could only laugh. The protagonist couldn't understand how he had scored perfectly when he hadn't even seen that entrance exam. With a blank look, the master reminded him of his abilities, stating that things had just happened. The master reminded him that Helios had been open to students for a month. This admission letter had been a problem a month ago, so under normal circumstances, he should have already gone to school. However, as things had become complicated, he had received various official documents requiring Raud to be sent to school. Since the master needed an excuse to delay Raud's arrival, something reasonable for Helios to accept, such a story had been created: the character of a little genius. Revealing his ingenuity, the master asked what Rude thought. However, the protagonist's face showed that he didn't like the character created by the master at all. Thus, the protagonist went to Helios. Having walked a bit around the school, his attention was caught. The professor guiding him had noticed that he was lost in thought and reminded him that class was about to start. Realizing his mistake, the protagonist followed the professor. Rude still cursed his master. He didn't understand how he would complete the mission with such an extravagant character. Since the admission letter had been a problem a month ago, Rude understood that his master had already sent the application a long time ago, which showed his intention to send him to school even without the mission. The protagonist wondered what the hell his master was thinking by wanting to send him to such a place. In any case, he was already at Helios. Looking around, he realized that, as expected from a school of magic, the magical flow was everywhere. Since he was already involved in this, the protagonist decided to complete the mission as quickly as possible so he could leave. Returning to talk to Rude, the professor advised him not to get nervous. The students were different in status and age, but making friends wouldn't be a challenge, as age or status didn't matter at that school. Curious, the protagonist asked what did matter then. Raising a finger, the professor answered the question with a single word: talent. The professor explained that, normally when new students arrived, they imagined themselves as great wizards in the future, and felt a happiness arise, as if they had already become real mages. However, this would only be an illusion. Just because they entered Helios didn't mean they would become complete wizards. In fact, most students failed in their attempts to surpass their limits and ended up falling into despair. Smiling, the professor asked the young man what he thought. He was curious to know the opinion of Rude Creasy, the first and only student to score a perfect score on the entrance exam. The protagonist gave a cold response to the professor. "If I try and still can't do it, I'll just leave." At such a response, the professor began to laugh. "You're really a lively young man." The protagonist frowned, remembering that the professor had insinuated that he was the only one in history to achieve a perfect score. It seemed this fact would become a bigger problem than he had imagined. The professor revealed that Helios always welcomed talented individuals like him, even though he was a bit behind compared to other students. Despite this, the professor sincerely welcomed him. Thus, Rude was introduced to the special magic school Helios and his new class. This was a place that nurtured those with talents to sense and use magic, elevating them to true wizards who would depend on their skills. At Helios, students were divided into advanced classes: Hoorays, intermediate classes, Clad, and beginner classes, Eden. Students who had just entered Helios would start in Eden, being able to advance to the next levels through the annual promotion exam. With Rude by his side, the professor proceeded to introduce him. "Well, everyone, due to health reasons, he is entering our class a bit late. This is Rude Creasy. Don't exclude him just because he arrived a little late, and get along." Immediately, some students agreed with the professor. Then the professor asked Rude to give a brief introduction about himself. The protagonist stepped forward in front of the class, showing a vague expression. "Nice to meet you." The students were surprised by the short introduction, but they could observe him, noticing that he was much younger than everyone there. The protagonist gave a brief greeting as he was searching for his target, and he found it. At the back of the room with a vacant look was Leadersis Dian Artian, the second son of the ducal family Artian, the one they called a monster. The protagonist wondered why Leadersis was sitting alone like that. Unaware of Rude's thoughts, the teacher asked him to take his seat. Leadersis didn't look fragile, which made Rude question whether he was really being hurt by being called a monster. What intrigued him was not knowing why the young man was receiving this nickname in a place like Helios. Rude decided that he would first investigate the situation and observe. At the moment the protagonist sat down, the person in front of him turned to speak. "Hello? Nice to meet you, skill user. You got a perfect score, didn't you? That makes you a skill user. That's amazing. How old are you?" "I'm 17. Starting the day irritated, the protagonist revealed he was 15. The young man in front of him nodded, as he had already expected Rude to be younger than him. The young man with blue hair introduced himself. His name was Dio Barus, but he asked Rude to call him Dio. Seeing the younger boy repeat his name, Dio requested that he speak casually since age didn't matter there. If they were in the same class, they would be friends. As Dio turned to chat, the teacher called his attention. "Dio, I know you want to be friends with Creasy, who aced the test, but let's save the chatting for later." Ignoring Dio, the protagonist decided he wouldn't stand out. His only goal was to quietly observe Leadersis. However, his plan to not stand out failed. As soon as the break arrived, other students surrounded him. They wanted to know where he was from, if he had a teacher, and various other things. Besides having achieved the highest score on the test, there was also the rumor of a chronic illness, which further increased the students' curiosity. Rude thought he could remain quiet and that it wouldn't be a problem, but it seemed that the young people were much more interested in him than usual. During the break, the students continued to crowd around Rude. When they switched classrooms, they still followed him. The protagonist didn't know if this was happening just because it was his first day, but that was the only explanation he could think of. Seeing his downcast expression, the students began to worry, thinking he might be sick. That was when Dio appeared to save the protagonist. All right, step aside. The great me has received the important mission of showing him around the school." Seeing that Professor Hale had asked Dio to show Rude around, everyone became envious. Many wanted to go too, but Dio quickly pushed them away. While the small dispute was happening, the protagonist looked toward Leaderkiss's table but realized that the young man had already left. He tried to look around to find out where the second son of the Duchess had gone, but someone interrupted him. Grabbing Rude by the shoulders, Dio began to guide him against his will out of the classroom, calling him friend. The protagonist followed Dio out of the school building, and as they passed through a corridor over a lake, the blue-haired boy explained that the school was so large that he could get lost, but that after a few days, he would get used to it. Seeing how quiet the protagonist was, Dio thought he wouldn't have any problems. Realizing he hadn't yet asked how to address him, the young man asked if he could call him Rude, something the protagonist didn't really mind. Dio revealed that when he arrived at the school, he was super nervous because it was very difficult to enter Helios without being a noble. Therefore, when he was accepted, he thought his hard work had finally paid off and that his happiness would begin now. However, Dio quickly realized that reality hadn't changed. In the tests, he was simply in last place. Dio couldn't help but praise how incredible Rude was for being the first in history to ace the test, being completely opposite to him. Seeing the little envy in the boy, the protagonist merely stated that he had been lucky. In tears, Dio asked him to share his good luck as well. The protagonist surprised Dio by complimenting him in a strange way. "I also think you're lucky. Out of so many students, you managed to be the worst. That's impressive. Not everyone can do that." Dio was shocked, unsure whether to cry or laugh at the comment. Hearing Rude insult him, Dio asked that at least he not do it with such a serious face. Shortly after, they arrived at the Central Library of Helios, the place they would frequent the most. The protagonist was impressed by the size of the library, which had several floors. Dio agreed with him, commenting that the amount of study materials there was enormous. He then pointed to some magical orbs and showed them to the protagonist. He explained that these spells maintained a soundproof enchantment that covered the entire table. As soon as they sat down, all external noise would be blocked so they could focus on reading, and that was exactly why they could talk normally now. Although Dio asked if the magic wasn't cool, the protagonist could only imagine how expensive it was to keep that spell active. Dio explained that the library had 4 floors, but for now, they could only access the first. The protagonist asked why, and in response, Dio called it the sadness of the lower classes. At that moment, someone from the upper floor raised their voice. "Hey, you there, the awkward guy with blue hair." The duo looked up and saw a young man with long blonde hair, followed by 2 others. Looking at Dio, he asked if the boy was in Professor Hale's class. Scratching his head, Dio confirmed to the senior that yes, he was. Seeing the hooray symbol on the senior's shoulder, the protagonist wondered if he was someone from the higher classes. Leaning in, the blonde young man revealed that he remembered him. Changing the subject, he asked about something else. "In your class. That's where the monster is, right? How is he doing?" Surprised by the question, Dio replied that the mentioned person was doing well. Smiling upon hearing the answer, the senior commented that this was indeed a misfortune. He then said goodbye, allowing them to return to what they were doing before. Dio sighed heavily. His heart almost leapt out of his mouth. The protagonist didn't understand why Dio was so nervous, and asked if it was because he was facing someone from a higher class. Dio couldn't believe Rude's question. "Oh, Rude, you're so naive. You haven't experienced the true hierarchy of society yet?" The protagonist didn't understand what Dio meant. Dio then held the protagonist's shoulders, asking him to listen carefully. "I'm going to tell you something that your blood and flesh need to remember if you want to survive in this treacherous place called Helios." Raising a finger, Dio gave him the first tip. Never go against the superior Hoorays class. Dio explained that these few students were the elite, known in the school for their exceptional talents and abilities. In this group, there were only 20 students in total, but each of them was powerful enough to defeat hundreds of students like them. Within this class, they enjoyed immense privileges and possessed overwhelming abilities. Hearing Dio explain that if they went against the Hoorays, they wouldn't survive academic life, the protagonist wondered if because they were just a group of kids who hadn't even awakened their abilities yet. Dio continued rambling, stating that there were over 400 students in the school, but only these few had become Hoorays, and for the others, they were like stars in the sky. Impatient, the protagonist asked Dio to move on to the second rule. To share the second rule, Dio leaned close to Rude's ear. Among them, be especially cautious of Chebel von Hedelion. The protagonist had no idea who this person was, but Dio revealed that this was the blonde guy they had just encountered. Dio explained that it was very risky to deal with this person, so Rude should try his best to stay away from him. It wasn't very common to encounter the Hoorays, but he instructed Rude to act with humility if he did meet them, because besides being highly skilled, they had a certain type of personality. Curious about their personality, the protagonist asked, "Are they terrible?" Quickly, Dio put his arm around Rude's shoulder, laughing loudly to drown out what he had said. Then Dio asked him to speak quietly so that no one would hear. Warning that there was something Rude needed to know, Dio revealed that Chebel von Hedelion was the heir of the prestigious Hedelion Marquis family, and someone particularly famous among the Hoorays. Because of his family's support, even the teachers did not interfere with him. There were rumors that if someone crossed his path, he would torment them until their complete ruin. Those who faced the dark side of Hedelion would have their lives turned into hell. Hearing Dio's warning, the protagonist asked about the monster. Since Rude would find out anyway, Dio told him that this was a classic example of what happened to those targeted by Hedelion. The protagonist was about to ask for details on the subject, but Dio hugged him to take him away. Hey, let's stop talking about boring things. We have more places to go, my friend." Leaving the library, Dio showed the protagonist the fountain in the academy courtyard. Then he took him to some shops and finally to a temple. Showing off the entire academy, Dio didn't stop chattering, telling stories about each place. The tour lasted all day, and soon evening arrived. With the sunset, the protagonist went to collect his luggage. He was already tired. The tour had been so long that he could call it an expedition. He couldn't remember Dio, who had been there for only a month but acted as if he knew everything. He felt that if Dio studied as much as he wasted time, he wouldn't be at the bottom of the class. At that moment, a woman arrived at the seat in front of the protagonist, worried that he had waited too long. Checking the protagonist's name, she informed him that his luggage had just arrived, and now he could use a temporary room until he was assigned one. The protagonist was surprised that his room hadn't been decided yet. The organizer commented that the rule was that everyone, except those from the higher classes, would share a room with another person. But at the moment, there were no vacant rooms for his class, so it would take some time to coordinate everything. She mentioned that this would be resolved in a few days, so he didn't need to worry. But the protagonist had information passed on by the Duchess. Actually, there is a vacant room, isn't there? The woman was surprised, and before her, Rude gave a small smile. Leadersis Dianartien, that guy, I heard he's using a room alone. Getting what he wanted, the protagonist headed straight to the room. He stared at the key in his hand for a moment, with a few thoughts. At the moment he made the request, the woman felt embarrassed. However, since he had made the request, she decided to accept it, asking him to seek her out if he changed his mind. Having made some effort to convince the organizer, the protagonist hoped his time had been worth it. Thus he decided to enter the room to find the main character of his mission. Opening the door and hearing no noise, the protagonist wondered if Liederkis wasn't in the room. Entering the quarters, the protagonist found a rather luxurious room for a school. The beds were adorned with gold, as were the archways on the walls. Seeing such a luxurious room, the protagonist thought it was too spacious for two people. Exploring the room, he found a lump under the sheets of one of the beds. Imagining it was Liederkis under the sheets, the protagonist wondered if the boy was already asleep. Deciding to find out, the protagonist went to the bed, grabbed the sheet and pulled it. Unlike the young man who had a grim expression during class, Liederkis had a peaceful expression while sleeping. Seeing the young man sleep so peacefully, even while facing a situation that wouldn't allow him to do so, the protagonist wondered if he should feel relieved. Leaving Liederkis aside, Rude decided to unpack his things. The moment he turned his back on Liederkis, the young man opened his eyes. Feeling a gaze on his back, the protagonist quickly turned around. But Liederkis had already begun to pretend he was sleeping again. While one pretended to sleep and the other knew the truth, the room fell into an awkward silence. As night fell at Helios Academy, and the students were already in their rooms, some chandeliers lit up to bring a dim light to the corridors. A young man with sea-green hair was walking through the corridors carrying some books. Amidst his walk, he heard a dark voice. "Stop summoning me like that. I have my own circumstances too. You know how it is. I need more time to avoid the eyes of the tower." The young man followed the voice that spoke about a contract until he arrived at a room where he saw the silhouette of a person and a huge shadow floating in front of him. He barged into Professor Hale's room, hastily asking what was going on. Professor Hale adjusted his glasses, asking the student what he was talking about. The young man didn't understand what had happened, revealing that he had seen a shadow in the room. If the young man had looked up, he might have seen the dark shadow hovering on the ceiling, but his eyes were on Professor Hale. However, when the shadow drew closer to him, he finally noticed its presence, but it was too late to scream or flee. The shadow devoured the student in an instant before returning to speak with the professor. The contract will definitely be fulfilled. The next day, Helios was at peace, as if the shadow had never existed. Waking up in his room, the protagonist found himself staring at the luxurious ceiling and realized he had overslept. Looking to the side, he noticed that the target of his mission had already left, as expected. Rude wondered when Liederkis had gone. He couldn't forget how the young man kept pretending to be asleep, no matter how much he tried to talk. The protagonist decided to give Liederkis some time to adjust, as the boy had a higher guard than he expected, but Rude had time for his guard to lower, as it did with everyone. Looking out the window, the protagonist saw some people talking, as if spreading a rumor. As if everyone already knew the news, the people outside turned, looking in the direction of his room. The protagonist was surprised to be stared at by everyone. Down below, students were already commenting that the new student in Hale's class, the one who had aced the entrance exam, was sharing a room with the famous monster. Some people wondered if the hoorays had already marked him, but the biggest gossip explained that the boy himself had requested to stay in that room. The protagonist had climbed to the roof of the school to hear the conversations better. He was surprised by the news that the choice of the room had already spread. This made things seem more serious than he thought. With the situation being more severe than he imagined, he realized he would need to take the initiative to resolve the problem before it worsened. While the protagonist observed the school, Lidertis was being taken to a corner of the courtyard by some other students. Some of the people watching the scene wondered if they should call a teacher. However, others warned them to avoid getting into trouble. It would be better not to get involved, so that the worst wouldn't happen to them. On top of the building, the protagonist could hear the students' opinions. In that corner, Liderkis was being pushed by the students who had brought him there. The student from the Clay's class who had pushed Lidersis did it to remind him of something he had already told him. The central corridor is not a place for a monster like you to walk. I told you to act like a rat and hide from my sight, but why the hell do you keep ruining my mood? Seeing Lidersis silent, the student asked if he wasn't going to respond. Noticing Lidersis's empty expression, he maliciously smiled. Seriously, what's the use of being born into a noble family if you're just a monster? It doesn't seem like the Arshan house cares about you. From what I've heard, even the training heir, your brother, keeps saying you're not related. Were you abandoned? How pathetic. With a sharp look, the young man displayed his satisfaction that Lidersis's family didn't care about him. Moving forward, he stepped on Lidersis's hand. His partner quickly tried to warn him that they couldn't hurt Liderkis, but the young man didn't care as he was dealing with a monster. Smiling, he wondered when they could step on someone from the Duke's lineage again. However, at that moment, a flying book hit him on the head. With the strong blow, he toppled to the side, unconscious. Seeing their companion unconscious and the book on the ground, his two accomplices asked where that book had come from. The protagonist, on top of the roof, drew their attention, informing them that the book belonged to him. With an expressionless look, he asked if they could return the book. As soon as the duo looked up, the protagonist jumped off the roof. Liderkis lifted his head, surprised to see who had helped him. The protagonist had landed on the guy who had taken his book, knocking him out. Oh, what a pity. I thought I'd land on the ground. The last guy standing desperately asked what the hell he was doing. With a deep voice, the protagonist warned that this wasn't a question he should be asking. Seeing Amir Eden belittling him, the last guy standing attacked Rude to make him shut up. However, Rude caught the punch coming his way by the wrist. The young man, being stopped so easily, didn't understand what kind of power that was. Slowly, the protagonist began to tighten his grip on his wrist even more. Fearful, the young man saw the boy in front of him open his mouth. You attacked me first, didn't you? The next scene shocked everyone, including Lidersis. Rude punched that guy, making him fall to the ground unconscious. In an instant, the protagonist had taken down the three guys who were bullying Lidersis. The protagonist couldn't believe that even with a light punch, the guy had turned out to be weaker than he thought. He then looked in the direction of Lidersis, who quickly tried to flee. However, seeing Lidersis attempting to escape, the protagonist called out to him. Pausing for a moment, Lidersis gave him a dark warning. Don't come near me. You shouldn't. As soon as he gave the warning, Lidersis fled quickly. The people who had witnessed the scene and how Lidersis was escaping looked in the direction of the alley. Two girls quickly entered the alley, and seeing the three fallen on the ground, they checked if they were okay. Hiding behind a pillar, the protagonist observed the scene. As always, the students were scattered around the outdoor courtyard, and as was common, the gossip was spreading. The protagonist noted the reactions, clearly different from the previous day. Being followed by Dio, the protagonist wondered where Liderkis had gone, questioning whether he should follow him. Lassoing Rude's neck with his arm, Dio pulled him away to a corner. The blue-haired young man took the protagonist to a storage room, locking the door to talk. Rude, are you sharing a room with that with Artyom? Is that true? Not caring, the protagonist confirmed that it was. Dio put his hand to his head, blaming himself for not explaining things correctly to Rude the day before. Immediately, Dio asked Rude to change rooms. Seeing the young man ask why, Dio became desperate. Why are you asking why? For the sake of your peaceful school life. You don't seem to understand the situation you're in, so listen carefully. Dio reminded Rude that he had said that if he got involved with the wrong people, his life would become a hell. And the monster that Chebel had mentioned was none other than the second son of Artyom. The protagonist's expression showed that he didn't care, as did his suggestion for Dio to continue talking. Thinking that Rude still hadn't understood, Dio asserted that Lidersis was already completely in Chebel's sights. Because of this, everyone avoided him, calling him a monster, even with his identity. Hearing everything, the protagonist's expression didn't change. Yes, I understand. Clearly the leader is Chebel von Hedelian. But what about you? Do you think it's justified that under someone's leadership, Liderkis is called a monster and ignored by everyone? While Rude was talking to Dio, the two didn't know that the subject of their conversation was hiding in a corner of that storage room, listening to the conversation. Hearing Rude's question, the young man was left speechless. He looked away, confirming that the way they treated the boy was unfair. The protagonist placed a hand on Dio's shoulder, showing a bright smile. "I agree with that too." With the brief comment, the smile on the protagonist's face gave way to a serious look as he turned in a certain direction, the place where the suffering boy was hiding. "And you? What do you think, Leadersis?" Dio was surprised, not understanding who Rude was talking to. However, when Leaderkiss stood up, emerging from behind the boxes, he finally understood. Incredulous to see the young man there, Dio hid behind Rude. "How long have you been there?" Without answering, Leadersis did not walk towards the two, but rather towards the warehouse door. However, Rude tried to stop him. What actually stopped him, though, was the box he tripped over, distracted by his nerves. The protagonist tried to call out to Leaderkiss once more, but Dio quickly covered his mouth, whispering in his ear, "What are you doing calling for him? Nothing will change, right? And you could end up like him." Despite Dio's whisper, Leadersis clearly heard what he said. Not wanting those people to get involved with him, the boy continued on his way. However, before he could leave, someone grabbed him by the shirt. The protagonist prevented him from leaving, displaying a smile that contrasted with Dio's surprise. "Leadersis, I think we need to talk." Leadersis stood still for a moment. After a few seconds, he rejected the offer. He freed himself from Rude and left. Left behind, Rude began to get irritated, not understanding why that boy wouldn't accept his help. Dio ran towards the protagonist, asking what he intended to talk about with Leadersis. The protagonist made the excuse that they were in the same room, which caused Dio to panic. "Go change rooms now. Didn't you notice the reaction just now? Even young Master Artian wouldn't like that." The protagonist didn't care what others thought, as he was on a mission. Now he wanted to understand why Leaderkiss was specifically being called a monster and what had happened in the last month. He wanted to know why the whole school referred to that boy in such a way. In the hallways where Leaderkiss passed, the students looked at him out of the corners of their eyes. No one understood why he still attended school. Many wouldn't be able to stay there if they were in his place. In the end, everyone felt a bad aura around Leaderkiss and treated him as the senior treated him, like a monster. Even in silence, those words tormented his mind. He remembered the past, the cries of a boy, and the loss of a young girl. He could still see the two together at the moment of farewell, as well as the judging looks directed at him for having been responsible for that. Even in the hallway, with such memories haunting him, Leaderkiss returned to reality. In the storage room, Dio decided to answer Rude's question. The reason they're calling him a monster is that, well, I don't know. With a small laugh, he shrugged. Seeing how useless he was, the protagonist decided to leave him behind. But before Rude could go, Dio interrupted him. "I don't know the exact details, so it's not much." Dio scratched his cheek, remembering that at first it was nothing much. But after a certain incident, everyone started calling Leaderkiss a monster. The protagonist looked at the boy, asking what incident he was referring to. Dio had heard some rumors. Not long after arriving at Helios, a large number of Eden students had gathered in the library to study. And on that day, an incident involving Artian occurred. The protagonist became even more interested upon discovering that an incident had taken place and focused on listening to the story as Dio enthusiastically recounted. On that day, he transformed into a terrible monster. There are stories that he had 3 eyes and dense fur. He also had 8 arms. Doesn't that sound intriguing? Hearing the story up to that point, Rude almost rolled his eyes, threatening Dio to stop with his jokes. Fearing being hit, Dio tried to explain himself, saying that he had only heard those rumors, but he wasn't sure, as he wasn't there that day. The protagonist couldn't imagine why such a bizarre story about Leaderkiss transforming into a monster would be spread. However, the only thing that corroborated this narrative was the fact that the library had been closed for a few days after the supposed incident, indicating that something had indeed happened. Putting the subject aside, Dio asked Rude again to change rooms, as it would only be a matter of time before the news reached the house of Heraeus, since the story had spread through the Edens. Rude had already noticed that the rumor had spread, commenting to Dio that people's attitudes had changed. Surprising Dio, Rude asked if he would also avoid him if he didn't change rooms. Dio was taken aback, as it seemed that the boy had no intention of changing rooms even after his warning. Rude displayed a confident and bright smile. "You're not going to ignore me, right? It's only been 2 days since we met, but I know you're not like that." Having been read like a children's book, Dio realized he was in deep trouble. The moment the two returned to the school area, heading towards the classroom, all eyes turned to them. Rude, just like the day before, felt that all the attention was on him, although the reactions were a bit different. Dio, on the other hand, tried to hide to avoid that unwanted focus. He looked at the protagonist, who seemed quite calm. "Rude, what are you really thinking? You're not planning to go against them, are you?" The protagonist remained silent for a moment, leaving Dio anxious before denying the boy's assumption. Dio was curious to know if Rude was really trying to help Lord Artian that much. Although he claimed it wasn't exactly help, Rude concealed the fact that it was, in fact, a plea. When they arrived in the classroom, something caught the protagonist's attention. Once again, Liderchis was at the back of the room alone at his desk. Liderchis' downcast gaze captured his attention, leading him to stare at him for a while. Dio observed the protagonist with an investigative look and heard him murmur, "Even if nothing changes, if I do nothing, it's as if I agree with this unfair situation." Rude's few words caught Dio's attention, and he began to understand what kind of person he really was. The protagonist said that because he knew that Liderchis had always been a loner, called a monster, and that was cruel. Before entering the room, the protagonist revealed something to Dio, leaving him a bit surprised. "We're already in the same boat now." Heading to his desk, the protagonist lifted it. Liderchis Dian Artian. No matter how much they said that status in Helios meant nothing, that Duke had a title that couldn't simply be ignored, things wouldn't have come to this point if he had made his true status public. In everyone's eyes, Rude's actions were surprising as he asked them to step aside while moving his chair. Everyone seemed incredulous at what Rude was doing. Even the mysterious girl with white hair stopped her reading to stare at him, to discover why Liderchis didn't take any action in that place. Remaining silent the whole time with incredible malice, Rude moved his chair to the surprise of even Liderchis and sat down next to him. The teacher began the class as if nothing had happened, talking about books left by kings in a distant past, which mentioned wizards as messengers of the gods. Wizards are described as great saviors, purifying the lands and freeing them from malicious demonic creatures. As the teacher explained, the protagonist followed along in his book, just like Liderchis, who hid his face under his hair, and Dio, who seemed more worried than attentive to the lesson. The teacher taught that wizards were considered saviors because, in the end, only those with enough power could fight against demonic creatures. As he chattered about the contents written in the books, and the students followed along in their own materials, class time passed. While everyone paid attention, a young girl with green hair sitting further ahead looked back in the direction of the protagonist with a thoughtful expression. As soon as the class ended, the students were free to stand up. However, the atmosphere in the room was terrible. Without any excitement, they looked at the back of the room with somber expressions, a mix of surprise, fear, and disgust. Everyone's gaze was fixed in one direction, the newcomer. The protagonist didn't care about the unwanted attention and tried to speak to Liderchis. However, the second son of the House of Dukes remained silent, unwilling to respond. Irritated, the protagonist insisted, provoking him, "Liderchis? Hey, answer me." Hearing his friend, Dio hurriedly stood up, banging on the table. "Rude, I'm suddenly so hungry." Trying to prevent Rude from continuing to insist with Liderchis, Dio attempted to distract him, inviting him to eat somewhere. Thus, Liderchis finally had a bit of peace. While they ate, Dio tried to advise the protagonist to think better. "You know it's true. Nothing will change if it's just the two of us. Besides, not even the person involved is doing anything about it. So why act like this? Don't you realize? He doesn't care if you're on his side or not." Even with Dio's words, Rude disagreed. To him, Liderchis was definitely hiding something. At one point, tired of the class, the protagonist stopped to observe the young man. Noticing how he read the book, something caught his attention. Liderchis was reading it upside down. This showed that he was definitely aware of Rude's presence. The protagonist was confident of that. Dio was quite frustrated with the situation. The friends who laughed and talked with him the day before now didn't even look in his direction. Contradicting his downcast expression, Rude opened a bright smile. "But I'm looking at you." Once again, Dio tried to convince the protagonist to change his mind, but Rude simply repeated what he had just said. It would be difficult if it was just the two of them working on this. Rude's plan was to get more friends to join them. At the moment they were talking, a group of students entered the cafeteria. Seeing them approach their table and noticing the threatening looks they were casting in their direction, Rude knew there was no turning back. The young dark-haired leader of the group looked directly at him and asked if he was Rude Chrissy. Crossing his arms, the protagonist questioned what he wanted. One of the leader's lackeys got irritated by Rude's arrogant tone towards his boss, but was interrupted before he could speak. The leader merely frowned, staring at the protagonist, and asked him to follow for a moment. Rude and Dio were taken to an outside area of the school building. to a garden where the leader comfortably sat on a large bench. Once settled, he ordered his lackeys to leave them alone. The blonde, who had tried to provoke Rude earlier, wanted to argue again but was startled by the repeated order and realized it would be wiser to obey. Looking at the young man in front of him, the protagonist recognized him. The day before, he had been with Chevalier von Hadelio. Staring at Rude, Clad asked if he knew why he had been called. Without changing his expression, the protagonist replied, "I have no idea. You're the one who called me, so why should I know?" Hearing the provocation, Dio hid behind Rude, while Clad's expression darkened. Clad rubbed his forehead to dissipate his anger, but his threatening gaze remained. "A newcomer who arrived late. It must be true how fearless you are. I'll get straight to the point. It would be wise if you didn't get close to that abomination." The protagonist pretended not to understand Clad's warning. "Abomination? I don't know what you're talking about. Is there an abomination in Helios?" Clad let out a small, mocking laugh at Rude's provocation, something he clearly disliked. Still, he was curious. Is it out of a misguided sense of compassion, or are you just playing the friend to satisfy yourself? Whatever it is, you better stop. There's always a causality for every outcome. Everything happens for a reason. Don't try to act like you know something when you don't. Stay out of business with the monster. If you get close, it will be you who faces the consequences. Hearing Clad's words, the protagonist asked if he was giving him advice. However, he stood up to face Rude with a threatening look. "Advice? No, this is a warning." As the evening approached, Rude and Dio gathered in an isolated courtyard. The protagonist still remembered the arrogant warning he had received. Dio was very worried and tried to alert Rude. If they had gone so far as to say that, perhaps they should rethink their actions. The protagonist looked at Dio, who was sitting on the ground, and asked what they should do then. However, the young man with blue hair simply put his hands on his head, unable to think of a solution. Unable to formulate a plan, Dio, with tearful eyes, asked what Rude would do. The protagonist reflected for a moment before stating, "First of all, we need more people on our side. I mean, it won't be easy, but we can worry about that later. For now, let's just gather more information." With seriousness in his voice, Rude asserted that he wanted, above all, to understand what was happening. Therefore, Dio would be in charge of finding someone who could help them. Curious about how Rude intended to uncover the truth, Dio merely watched the rookie give a slight smile. Wouldn't asking him directly be the quickest way? The protagonist wanted, above all, to have an appropriate conversation with Littersis, and only after that think of a solution to the problem, whether by taking down Cheval or turning the school upside down. Searching for Littersis, the protagonist went to the storage room where he usually hid. However, this time, he did not find him. What Rude did not know was that Littersis had been called to the principal's office. There, a white-haired lady wearing a monocle asked if there was any problem with his school life. However, instead of telling the truth, the boy claimed that nothing was happening. The principal was silent for a moment before speaking. "As you know, Daner and I are acquainted, so if there is something on your mind, I want you to feel free to tell me. If you don't want to help yourself, the school won't be able to do anything for you." While Littersis spoke with his mother's friend, the other students continued with their academic routines as usual. However, in the corridors of Eden, someone interrupted them. Surprising everyone, Rude was looking for Litterkiss, asking if anyone had seen him. However, everyone fled, not giving him the answer he wanted to hear, the boy's location. As he walked through the halls, Rude could already hear the students whispering about him. "It's him! Why is he looking for the abomination? Don't make eye contact with him." The protagonist was already struggling to start conversations with the other students, but at that moment, a girl approached. "If you are referring to the monster, I think he went to the storage room on the west side." The protagonist looked back and saw the girl with white hair take the initiative to say that Littersis was carrying a magical box with him. Surprised that someone had finally taken the initiative to talk to him, the protagonist thanked her. The girl, named Isle, watched the protagonist walk away as several other students approached to flatter her. While she was surrounded by compliments and murmurs, she saw the rookie stop, turn back, and walk in her direction. Both she and the other students around her were surprised. As he approached her, Rude corrected her. "However, the one I'm looking for is not a monster or abomination, but Littersis." After the simple correction, the protagonist turned and walked away again. Eel did not understand what was so peculiar about that boy, but deep down she found him quite interesting. Once again, the protagonist climbed onto a roof from where he had a wide view. He was watching a place where he was sure Littersis would pass if he were going to the storage room on the west side. The protagonist had a brief fear that Litterkiss might have already passed by, but he decided to wait a little longer. It didn't take long for Rude to locate his target. Just as the girl with white hair had said, Littersis was carrying a box. The protagonist was about to call him, but hesitated. He wondered if he should really call him from there, as from the spot he was in, he would also attract everyone's attention. However, remembering the warning Clad had given him, Rude made a decision. In an instant, everyone's attention in the courtyard turned to a loud voice that echoed all around. "Lie der Sis!" Hearing his name, Littersis looked up, spotting Rude on an elevated point. From there, Rude waved at him with a smile. "Wait for me, I'm coming!" Immediately, Litterkiss started to run, fleeing from the rookie who was bothering him. Seeing him run away again, the protagonist was incredulous. He didn't chase him immediately. He just watched as the young man moved away with his box. The protagonist sighed, thinking about the emotions Littersis must be feeling. The moment he rejected his help also came to mind. The protagonist was starting to realize that Littersis would try to avoid him at all costs. Tired of this, he jumped from where he was, falling from a height of over 10 meters and landing on the ground with a serious expression. If Littersis intended to run from him, it was obvious that he would pursue him. In the midst of his escape, Littersis heard a voice calling his name. With each moment, the voice got closer. When he looked back, he saw something that looked more like a demon chasing him at full speed. Along the way, people were incredulous as they witnessed the scene. Looking up, a girl from Rude's class asked her green-haired friend Rin if she had seen the same thing, the boy jumping from such a great height. The scenery rushed past the boys who were running at full speed. However, Rude was gradually getting closer to the young man ahead of him. The people around couldn't help but stare at them, wondering what was happening and why they were running. Rude soon realized that unintentionally he had become a spectacle. The protagonist was impressed by Littersis's speed, barely managing to catch up with him. As the situation felt bizarre, Rude decided to capture him first. However, just as his hand was about to touch Littersis, the boy grabbed one of the balls he kept in his box. As soon as he touched the ball, the mana within it was released, causing his speed to increase exponentially. The protagonist was surprised to see Litterkiss pulling away using magic until one of the balls that bounced out of the box hit him on the forehead. Just as he was about to jump over a fence, Litterkiss noticed that Rude had been hit and turned around, apologizing. Hearing his first word, Rude ordered him to stop running if he really wanted to apologize. He didn't even understand why they needed to continue this senseless chase. Hastily, Litterkiss stated that he was running because Rude was chasing him. However, this only made Rude more irritated since it was Littersis who started running first. The boy murmured that he was fleeing because Rude had called him, but the protagonist couldn't hear him properly. At that moment, Littersis looked down, and what he saw caused shock to be etched on his face. At the bottom of the academy grounds, Cheval was gathering with other students. Feeling a gaze directed at him, Cheval quickly looked up towards Littersis. Not knowing what he had seen, the protagonist approached and insisted that he stop running so they could talk. However, Litterkiss's voice turned dark. "Stay away from me!" The protagonist was shocked by the terror in that voice, the voice of a boy who continually pleaded for him to stay away. Rude let out a slight sigh before responding. "All right, I'll keep my distance. No way am I saying that." He picked up the ball that had hit his forehead and threw it with all his might at the back of Littersis's head. Feeling the impact, which soon formed a huge bump, Litterkiss turned around, confused about what had happened. In an instant, Rude grabbed him by the shirt, getting closer. "What are you going to do if I get this close?" Seeing the determined look of the small young man in front of him, Litterkiss was shocked. The proximity between the two created a momentary awkwardness, causing Rude to back away quickly. "Well, it's not like I was going to do anything to you. I just wanted to talk." At that moment, Chevalier appeared atop the fence behind Littersis. "Talk!" Littersis froze upon hearing his voice, unable to react to the foot that stepped on his back. "With this abomination here?" Leaning on Littersis, Chevalier glared at the protagonist. "What are you going to say to him?" The look on his face became increasingly maniacal. "Hey, Eden boy, tell me, what are you going to say to this?" Before Chevalier could finish his sentence, he felt something hit him. Losing his balance, he began to fall backward. His surprised gaze met the incredulous look of Litterkiss, as well as the vacant stare of Rude. Just like that, the protagonist approached the edge of the fence, watching Cheval tumble down the slope. As he observed him fall, the protagonist couldn't help but laugh. "Ha ha ha ha! He certainly has a bad habit. Look, he managed to land well." Incredulous, Litterkiss dropped his box, scattering all the balls across the ground. Rude was about to call Litterkiss to go somewhere else when a hand grabbed his head. Chevalier, climbing back up onto the fence, looked at the protagonist with a fiercely cruel gaze. "You don't value your life, Eden child?" In response to Cheval's question, the protagonist looked at him without any emotion. "No, I want to live, and please take your hands off me." The fact that the boy showed no fear only irritated Cheval further. "You brat, Do you know who you're talking to, acting like this with me? The protagonist retorted to the senior, asserting that he knew exactly who he was. You're Cheval von... Wait, what was the rest again? Ha 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 ha. Neither Cheval nor Liederkes could believe the joke made by Rude. In an instant, the protagonist grabbed Chevalet's arm. Aren't you someone from the incredible upper-class heroes? Being recognized did not make Cheval any less angry. His hand began to tremble as he realized that the boy was stronger than him and could easily push his hand away. What's wrong with you? Where did such an arrogant kid come from? Immediately, Cheval signaled to his companion Anna, who was downstairs. Anna threw him a necklace with a diamond-shaped stone. Cheval skillfully caught the necklace, ready to use it. Hey, Eden boy. I'm not generous enough to let you act so recklessly without knowing who I am. This will be a great opportunity for you to learn what happens to reckless people. At that moment, Liederkes stepped in front of the protagonist to protect him. Using the necklace, since he couldn't do anything on his own, Cheval intended to show what a true Harris was capable of. The protagonist realized that this was a high-level magical stone. Regardless, he was curious to see if Cheval could actually use magic with it. Holding the magical stone confidently, Cheval proclaimed, "It's too late to regret, so watch carefully the magic of Cheval, a future great mage." While Cheval was giving his speech, the protagonist asked Liederkes what he was going to do. Liederkes suggested that they call a teacher. The protagonist liked the idea and told Liederkes to go do that, but the boy threw the task back at him, which he promptly returned. Seeing the two argue while ignoring him, Cheval became furious. "What are you whispering in this situation? Don't you understand the situation you're in right now?" Immediately, Cheval activated the mana from the magical stone, chanting a spell. "Ramael, Crucivel Merica." The protagonist waited to see the magical spell. He didn't want to get involved in something big, so he thought it would be better to run before they got caught in this situation. Before he could pull Liederkes away to leave, he felt the boy's hand grip his shoulder. Liederkes stepped in front of the protagonist with a confident voice. "I told you not to get close to me, so go. I will take care of this." Rude couldn't believe that kid. A second ago, he had such a confident voice, but his body was trembling like a kitten in the cold. Seeing Liederkes trying to protect him, Cheval began to laugh, pretending to be emotional, but his expression quickly changed. "It's been a while since I saw you talking nonsense in front of me. Have you gone crazy just because a rookie started paying attention to you?" Even though he was scared, Liederkes responded, trying to free Rude by stating that he had nothing to do with the situation. Irritated by Liederkes' voice, Cheval advanced. In a leap, his hand grabbed Liederkes' face and smashed it against the ground. The protagonist was surprised to see Liederkes being attacked so suddenly. On top of him, Cheval smiled with a dark voice. "The endless nightmare I desire. I will send you to hell." Faced with danger, a memory flowed into Liederkes' mind. In that memory, he saw a girl in a white dress walking through a garden. She was trying to show him the beauty of a flower she had picked. Bringing the flower close to her face, the girl smelled it to appreciate its aroma. But when she looked back at Liederkes, all he could see was her face covered in blood. Liederkes found himself sitting on the ground as the injured girl walked toward him. Behind her, who had once seemed innocent, he could see an overwhelming demon with red eyes bringing darkness and terror to devour them. Liederkes snapped out of his memories, pleading, "No, please." Cheval was surprised by the sudden change in atmosphere, losing his concentration for a second. In that moment, Rude jumped on Cheval, hitting him on the back of the neck with an elbow. Throwing the senior to the side, the protagonist checked on Liederkes' condition. Cheval looked at the protagonist furiously. "Are you crazy? How dare you interfere like that?" However, he was met with a cold voice. "Did you do something to Liederkes?" The senior got up, straightening his clothes, and stated that he had only reminded that monster of what he had forgotten to do wrong. The protagonist didn't quite understand what Cheval was talking about. However, Cheval approached them with an even more malicious look. "A monster that doesn't know its place needs to be punished. And it seems you also don't know yours, so you will receive the same treatment." Having knocked down Liederkes, Cheval faced Rude maliciously. "A monster who doesn't know its place needs to be punished, and it seems you don't know yours either, so you'll get the same treatment." With a superior air, he questioned, "Do you happen to have a memory you don't want to remember? Or a fear you've never overcome? Because I can show you something even worse." Hearing Cheval's words, Rude wondered if the young man was using illusion magic. This meant the truth behind the story about Liederkes turning into a monster in the library might have been caused by that. Seeing Rude silent, Cheval grew even more arrogant, but with a cold look, the protagonist wondered if he should finish him off. It was at that moment that a reprimanding voice echoed across the campus, where several frightened students watched the fight. "You there! What do you think you're doing?" Chevle von Hadelio, stop immediately! Seeing Professor Khan, Chevle clicked his tongue. Hey, Eden boy, consider this your lucky day. Professor Khan jumped in front of Chevle, checking on the students, Lidersis and Rude, who had lain down pretending to faint upon seeing the professor. While the professor scolded Chevle and checked on the boys, the protagonist missed the chance to instruct Chevle. Still, he wondered what had happened between him and Lidersis. The next day, a group of curious students sneaked up to the front of the secretary's office, trying to hear what was going on inside. Rude, with his usual furrowed brow, listened to the complaints. Mr. Krishi, I heard you jumped off a balcony yesterday. Is that true? The protagonist immediately denied it upon hearing the question. Then he was asked again, Isn't it? And what about you running wildly around the campus with Mr. Artian? The protagonist promptly lied. I never did that. The professor smiled upon hearing the boy, who seemed innocent. Ha ha ha, I thought so too. The young people watching the interrogation didn't believe the professor had been fooled so easily. The professor knew Rude's situation. He had started studying at the school a month after classes began because of his illness, and he shouldn't be able to run with his body in such a weakened state. Rude was incredulous at the excuse the professor himself had made. He had even forgotten about that disguise. The professor asked Rude to be careful. You'll be in trouble if you get worse right after your condition improved. Also, if you get involved the wrong way with a senior while you're still in Eden, your school life will be affected. The protagonist understood the professor's words. Leaving the room, he felt upset that he still hadn't managed to have a proper conversation with Liderchis again. As the protagonist walked down the corridor, Dio ran toward him. Colliding with him, he was startled. Rude! Dio grabbed the protagonist's shoulders. What happened? Is it true that you got involved with Chevalier? The protagonist nodded. It was true that they had met. Startled, Dio asked if the rumors spread around the school were true. Fearing new gossip, the protagonist asked what exactly he was talking about. Worried, Dio revealed, They say you got beaten by Chevalier while playing excitedly with Lord Artian. Dio promptly checked if Rude was okay, if he had hurt himself anywhere. The protagonist lowered his head and answered, I'm fine, unlike Lidershis. A terrible atmosphere settled among the boys. Falling into a void of fear, Dio asked if Lidersis was still alive. The protagonist couldn't believe Dio's question. Of course he's alive. Do you think the school would be so calm if he weren't? Dio was startled by the look Rude showed. The protagonist changed the subject, warning that they needed to go. The blue-haired boy was confused and asked where they were going. The answer was brief. Let's check on Liderkis. The pair went straight to the storage room. Since Lidersis had already left the infirmary and Rude had already gone to class, that was the only place left. Worried, Dio asked if they shouldn't wait in the classroom. The blue-haired boy looked around, showing there was no one in the storage room. However, upon hearing a noise, he was startled. Walking towards some boxes, they realized Lidersis really was there. Dio hid behind Rude, who walked up to Lidersis. What are you doing here? Looking for something? Lidersis remained silent, ignoring the teasing. However, Rude didn't want to miss the chance to talk. Bending down beside Lidersis, the protagonist offered the young man a candy. Sitting on one of the boxes, Rude tried to cheer him up. Forget the rumors that you turned into a monster and tell me why Chevle calls you that. Liderchis lowered his head, murmuring, Don't meddle in other people's business. How others call me has nothing to do with you, so leave me alone. Stop caring about me and don't come near me. Stop paying attention to me. The protagonist was surprised by Liderchis's exaggerated reaction. Just like Dio, who didn't know what to say to improve the situation. The protagonist stood up, questioning if Liderkis planned to keep living while others called him a monster. Head down, Lidersis confirmed, Yes, I really am a monster after all. Seeing the sadness in Liderchis's body language, the protagonist extended his hand to him. Lidercis accepted a candy while Rude encouraged him. It's okay. If no one wants to tell me, I just need to ask Chevle von Hadelio directly. Liderchis, stunned, looked at Rude, who smiled, showing he wasn't lying. Because I want to know why he calls you a monster. That's my personal curiosity, so you shouldn't interfere. Lidercis was shocked to have his own words used against him. At dusk, in the seniors' building, Chevle heard the information he had asked to be checked. His name is Rude Krishi. He started attending classes a month later than usual because of an illness. They say he has had a fragile body since childhood. Chevle, recalling how vivid the boy he met was, couldn't believe it. The young woman in front of him, holding a sheet of information, stated that Rude seemed to be using the same room as the monster. Moreover, the student who walked with him was Dio Varus from the same class. Lastly, the most notable fact the girl discovered was that Rude was the first person to get a perfect score on the entrance exam. Chevle openly mocked, I wondered why he acted that way, but it's because he did well on a simple test? Frowning, the young woman asked Chevle what they should do. For Chevle, what they should do was simple, make him crawl back to where he belonged. While Chevlet revealed his evil plans, an imperceptible dark energy overflowed from a monostone necklace lying on the table. That energy was carried by the wind, drifting away from the building. When it reached a bush, it took on a human form, spying on the pair before disappearing. Leaning against a barricade, a young woman with purple hair sighed as she remembered what she had seen. However, the voice of an excited girl woke her up. "Tessie! Tessie! Look!" The man sitting at the tea table with the girl reprimanded her. "Princess, you shouldn't play with your food!" Irritated, the girl argued. "Ram, I already told you not to call me princess here." But Ram replied, "Princess, you calling the knight Tessiana Tessie isn't appropriate either." But the girl, who had already stacked her cookies, didn't want to stop calling Tessie Tessie. Picking up one of the cookies, Tessiana herself corrected her. "Princess, here I'm not Tessie, but Professor Raoul." That night, the protagonist received a call on his transmission crystal. The person on the other side wanted to know how school life was going, if he had made any friends. The protagonist corrected his master, reminding him he wasn't there to make friends. "Our client made a request, but I don't think Liederkis wants to be helped. He told me to stop paying attention to him. He hates himself. I don't think there's anything I can do." Hearing about the work, Ophion's master changed the subject. "Have you made any friends?" The protagonist wanted to hang up, but the master quickly stopped him, returning to the topic he really wanted to discuss. "So what do you think? Do you believe that child really doesn't want help?" Although he didn't know what others thought, Rude could see something strange. It's like they were all hypnotized together. They call Liederkis a monster and ignore him. I think Chevlet von Hadelio made this happen. The master was confused upon hearing the name Hadelio. When Rude asked if the master didn't know him, the answer was mild. "Of course I know him." Ophion's master knew the Hadelio family, a noble family producing powerful mages. The current head of the family, Marquis Hadelio, was still active, especially when it came to dealing with nobles as a central figure in the capital. Knowing the family's background, Ophion's master raised a hypothesis. Marquis Hadelio and Duke Artien are known to be on bad terms. I believe it's because of the rivalry between their families. Rude thought it went further. The two young men were not only on bad terms, but there was a one-sided attack happening. Hearing Rude, Ophion's master asked if Liederkis had done something, like stealing Chevlet's girlfriend or something even more precious. Sighing, Rude wished it were something that simple. Warning that he would investigate the two families, Ophion's master gave a final piece of advice. "Rude, you don't need to take this so seriously. Our client is important, but you should enjoy your school life, making friends and more friends." The protagonist frowned and reached out to end the connection. Seeing what the young man was doing, Ophion's master quickly tried to stop him. "Wait!" But he couldn't, and silence returned. Taking his transmission box, the protagonist climbed down from the rooftop ledge, walking toward his room. Upon learning about the disagreement between the involved families, Rude decided to observe a little more. At the top of a cliff, breaking the sea waves, there was a house surrounded by trees. A man climbed the walls of the house, reaching the balcony. Completely wet, the man with differently colored eyes and a tattoo on his face sighed. "Why did Miss Ruby Monterre choose to live in this place? She really doesn't know what she's doing. If he wants to adapt to this place, he'll have to change that temper." The man touched the door leading inside the house, and his hand became translucent, as if passing through a disguise barrier. As soon as he entered, the man changed his irritated expression to a cute smile. "Miss Ruby, cute Ruby, Elzebul is here." Lying on the floor in the living room, a monstrous fish interrupted his reading and stared at Elzebul. The man sighed upon seeing that Ruby wasn't there. The fish stole his reading and explained. Miss Ruby Monterre stepped out for a moment. Surprised, Elzebul commented, "Seems the human kingdom is livelier than I thought." Curious, the fish asked if the man had swum here. Elzebul confirmed and said that on the way, he saw others like the fish. The monster got furious being compared to sea creatures, pushing Elzebul away, complaining about the fish smell. Changing the subject, Elzebul sat on a nearby chair. "But why do you look like that? Didn't Miss Ruby say you should keep your human form to get used to it?" The fish snorted. "I use the human form, but it's very annoying." Seeing how the monster was stuck in that room, Elzebul understood why he was irritated and advised him, "You're in the human world. You should enjoy it while you're here." The fish reminded Elzebul he wasn't here to play. A dark look appeared in Elzebul's eyes. He stood up quickly and pulled the fish's tail. Dragging him to the window, he declared, "As a colleague, I can't let you be upset. I'll help you forget your frustration." Like a broken kite, the big fish was thrown without resistance toward the sea. Creating a big wave, he fell into the waters. Elzebul laughed excitedly. "How is it? Isn't it refreshing?" From the crystal-clear sea waters, a human face emerged. Taking a human appearance, the fish partially surfaced, irritated. "Elzebul, you're as annoying and rude as ever, even here." Elzebub, leaving the house, didn't care and retorted to the monster, who was now partially in human form. As expected, you still have that boring, annoying personality without a hint of fun. Hearing Elzebub's provocation, the fish snorted, "Shut up if you want to stay alive." While Elzebub and Gamode continued to argue, a person appeared at the beach house. A young man with small horns landed on the highest pillar of the house, watching the commotion. Frowning, the young man reprimanded them. "What's going on? I told everyone to behave in this place." Ignoring the pair, the young man grabbed a set of papers. On the cover of the document was written, "Infiltration success at Helios Magic Academy." At the academy mentioned in the document, everything seemed normal. However, Professor Khan was not so calm. He hurriedly called for Professor Rowell, but he ended up finding Professor Hale, who frowned upon seeing him. Professor Khan didn't notice the look and asked if he had seen Rowell. Upon hearing from Hale that he hadn't seen her, Khan scratched his neck, wondering where she might be. Walking toward him, Khan observed what Hale was doing. On the floor, there were numerous enchantments in a vast area, leaving Khan impressed. "This is the teleportation circle that will be used for Eden's training field. It looks very complicated. Is this your work, Professor Hale?" Hale confirmed the platform's authorship. Looking around, Professor Khan commented that he had heard they would connect to the tower this time. The circle, with a magic stone at its center and several symbols around, looked amazing for its function. Hale smiled, satisfied with his work. "Still, being the first field training of the year, we need to prepare properly, don't you think? We must ensure no accidents happen." Professor Khan was impressed with Hale, the master of the teleportation circles. "You're amazing." At the same time, a young man threw a notebook onto the table. In front of him was Rude, silent. Curious, the protagonist asked Dio what it was. Dio bragged, "What do you think it is? These are precious pieces of information I gathered with all my power." Seeing that it was a small book, the protagonist became curious as he flipped through it. "You put all this together in just one day? Incredible." Tired, Dio leaned back on the table. It had been a tough journey. Everyone tried to avoid him. Still, seeing how many people had given their testimonies, the protagonist asked if everyone there had the skills to confront Chevle. Dio ended up revealing his method of working. He had first looked for nobles and those with the best grades. Surprised, Rude stared at Dio, who defended himself. "Why are you looking at me like that? It may not seem like it, but I worked really hard." While the two talked, a girl approached a green-haired girl, asking worriedly if something was wrong. As they talked, Dio raised the notebook to show 2 names to Rude. "I don't know about the others, but these 2 people can help." While Rude read the names, Dio explained about those people. "The first is Utiarnan Maria Kanziol. You know that name, right? She's the only royal studying at Helios. She is a princess of direct imperial lineage." Young Dio smiled brightly, imagining Utiarnan Maria. "She is called a princess even at the academy and receives special treatment. With the administration's permission, she is always accompanied by a guard sent from the imperial castle. Not even the professors dare to go against her. If she allies with Artian, even someone like Chevle will be nothing." Suddenly, Dio realized he was speaking too loudly. He quickly shrank back, asking if anyone had heard him. Around the room, everyone was staring at him. In some corners, a pair commented, "Are they plotting something? This is so annoying. Since Rude arrived, no day has been calm. It's bad enough being in the same room as the monster, and now they want to drag everyone into their problems without a good reason." On the other side of the room, the 2 girls heard the malicious comments, incredulous. If the guy they call a monster wasn't treated like one, everyone talking bad about him would beg to be his friend. Annoyed, the young girl asked Rin, the green-haired girl, if she didn't think the same. Rin, looking at the pair of boys at the end of the room, ended up agreeing with her friend. Being constantly stared at by the green-haired girl, the protagonist looked at her, and she quickly looked away. Ignoring the girl's looks, the protagonist asked Dio about the other name. Promptly, Dio revealed, "The second name is Lapis Yuen Nuadli. As the only son of the current Nuadli Duchy, he seems to have considerable influence within the academy. Although he and young Lord Artian are both sons of dukes, he is the sole heir of his own house." Dio said he heard that young Lord Nuadli and Chevle entered Helios at the same time, and their relationship was terrible. Now they just ignored each other. Finding out someone hated Chevle, the protagonist thought it would be easy to get close to him. Dio agreed that Rude was right, but there was still a small problem. Since young Lord Noodley entered Helios up to that moment, he had not yet been promoted from Eden. Rude couldn't believe it and asked why. The answer was obvious. Lapis Yuan was not good enough. Dio revealed that, when it came to magic theory and other academic aspects, Yuan was one of the best. However, he seemed horrible in practical combat and skill application. Dio tried to ease the problem. Even if he's not that talented, he's still a Duke's heir, super popular, and hates Chevle. Wouldn't he be useful? Rude ended up praising Dio's work, knowing he hadn't done his best. To be honest, I wanted to find someone decent among the hairy students like Chevrolet, but they are in a completely separate area. It's hard even to see them. There's no way to know where they are or what they're doing. While Dio claimed these two people could help, two different figures entered the room. The pair of students knocked on the board, drawing everyone's attention. The students were surprised to see students from CLAD and wondered why they were there. In front of the board, CLAD revealed the reason. I came to deliver a message from Professor Uvinos, who was supposed to teach you at this time. Instead of the regular class, you should go to the large lecture hall to the east to prepare for practical training. So I would like everyone to start moving now. Seeing the student feign humility, the protagonist looked around. Everyone seemed suspicious of the practical training. Looking for Lidersis, he wondered where the boy was. Outside the building, a bucket of water was thrown on Lidersis, who had fallen to the ground. The group in front of him mocked. "The wet rat look suits you very well, abominable young lord. Are you aware now? We're teaching you in case you mess up. Your situation won't change just because two idiots are by your side." At that moment, another person approached, telling the trio to take it easy. Manon came closer, reminding them that the goal of the day was not to bother Lidersis. Another student arrived next to Manon and whispered something. Manon smiled mischievously and ordered, "Bring the monster, they said the stage is ready." In another area of the school, Rude, who had already searched everywhere for Lidersis, saw Dio running toward him, asking them to give up. They had already searched the dormitories, the storage room, and even the garden. Dio, despite knowing Lidersis couldn't be found, remembered they were late for class. Frowning, the protagonist couldn't help but wonder where Lidersis was since he had appeared for class that morning. Dio guessed that Lidersis was hiding and begged to go to class. "I'll be screwed if even a single point is deducted from my grade for being late." The protagonist ended up agreeing with Dio, but definitely felt something was wrong. The students gathered in the hall where the class was supposed to take place. However, looking around, they were confused. They didn't see the professor anywhere. Instead, the group of CLAD students was present. Manon, looking around, asked another student if everyone was there. He replied that he had gone to Professor Hale's room and confirmed that everyone was present. Manon smiled, and seeing that the guests she wanted were also in the hall, wondered if they should start. In his room, Professor Hale was confused when he saw no one, wondering where everyone was. Dio slipped through the plants outside the hall with Rude and questioned how important that class could be for the doors to be locked. Rude, however, found it stranger that Dio knew there was a secret passage to that hall. There was a small hatch in one of the outer walls, but they would have to crawl through it. Inside the hall, two students under Manon's command were pushing some carts. Manon took one of the spheres from a cart and explained what the students were going to do. Before students officially become mages, they cannot use magic without a mana stone or sphere. So the first thing they are taught is how to activate the internal mana of these spheres. Manifesting mana is the most basic, but also the most important. Today, as preparation for the exercise, we will present a special class to test your mana manifestation skills. Confused, one of the students raised his hand and asked if the professor was aware of this. Manon frowned, and quickly the students in his group surrounded the young man. In moments, the rest of the class saw that student disappear, swallowed by the group of seniors. After getting rid of the nuisance, Manon asked if anyone else had something to say. Everyone immediately covered their mouths and forced themselves to remain silent. This pleased him, but there was still one more explanation. The mana sphere was made for tests, so it cannot be used for anything other than demonstration magic. When you manifest mana in it, the sphere changes color according to your skill and intensity. In short, the better you use it, the brighter the color. However, you Edens will only be able to cause small changes, so you will be judged by the strength behind the sphere. At that moment, the target was brought to the center of the hall with the Lidersis tied to it. Manon then stated, "You will be evaluated with an aiming practice. This target has special treatment, so it will not be damaged unless the mana runs out. This will allow precise judging of the energy manifested in the spheres thrown at it." The students around the hall were horrified to realize that Manon wanted them to throw monospheres at Lidersis. Without even mentioning his name until then, Manon looked at the young man tied up. It wouldn't be fun just to throw spheres at a target, so whoever hits the head will get extra points. Manon snapped his fingers, and his subordinates dropped the manospheres at the feet of the Eden class students. Seeing the little balls on the ground, Manon asked who wanted to be first. But in the middle of the question, he noticed something. Seeing the surprised expression on Manon's face, a young man approached, asking what was wrong. Manon murmured, "He's not here." Fury appeared in his eyes as he questioned his subordinate. "What happened? He's not here." The young man was confused because he was sure the person they were looking for was in the room when he gave the warning. Manon became extremely irritated but held back from attacking the ally. Dio, the first to arrive at the hall through the secret passage, wondered what was going on. Seeing the students on the stage, he quickly pushed Rude, telling him to go back. Realizing something was wrong, he said they needed to call a professor. Frowning, the protagonist looked at the hall. Manhwa, still furious, was asked by his subordinate what they should do. Since they had already gone too far, Manhwa ordered to proceed with the plan. He frowned because he had created that situation without informing Cheval, and now things were getting out of control. Some students began to pick up the monospheres. Soon, Manon's subordinate walked to the front of the stage. Is anyone brave enough to be first? If there are no volunteers, I will have to choose someone. Quickly, he pointed to a visibly scared girl, ordering her to pick up a monosphere. With a hesitant look, the girl refused. I can't do this. Hearing her, the student asked, You can't? Then would it be okay if we swapped the target for you? Terrified by the idea, the girl looked around for help, but everyone looked away. With no other choice, she took one of the spheres, trembling. The senior smiled, satisfied with her submission, and asked if she knew what to do. Observing the sphere, he saw no significant change in its color. Satisfied, he instructed, The next step is the most important, and since you're first, I'll give you the highest grade if you at least hit the monster. The girl hesitated, but he encouraged her again, ordering her to throw. She closed her eyes and threw the sphere. However, the ball curved downward, and with the weak force it was thrown, it fell meters away from Lidersis. The senior couldn't believe what he saw, but continued with the plan. You are disqualified. Irritated that things were not going as planned, one of the seniors took the initiative, grabbed a sphere that emitted a bright glow, and threw it furiously. Fortunately, it only landed near Lidersis. All the students were startled, fearing they might also be forced to do the same, or worse, become the next target. The senior on stage applauded his colleague and asked if everyone understood what was supposed to be done. With an intimidating look, he asked who would be next. Dio was distraught by what the seniors were doing. He turned around, calling Rude to immediately go find a professor, but Rude was nowhere to be found. At that moment, a student raised his hand, surprising the senior. Rude, among the others, stepped forward and asked to be next. Dio was shocked to see Rude volunteer, as well as the seniors, and even Lidersis himself. With a smile on his face, the protagonist didn't care about the panicked looks. Everyone was confused to see Rude. Even Manon frowned. It was impossible for anyone to stop looking at Rude, knowing how close he tried to be to Lidersis. Even as they wondered what Rude planned to do, one of the seniors asked him to try. The protagonist took one of the spheres and passed through the other students. While the senior explained about hitting the monster, he was surprised. Looking to the side, he saw a huge hole in the stone target. Everyone in the hall was extremely shocked. Even Dio, who was hiding, was left speechless. Looking to the side, Lidersis could see the hole created in the target, just a few centimeters from him. Sighing, upset for having missed, the protagonist crouched down. Manon was still in shock from what he had witnessed. Lidersis, who had gotten a little dizzy from the impact, recovered. At that moment, the protagonist took another manosphere and asked, Too bad I missed. Can I try once more? This time I'll hit the right target. A powerful mana flowed into the sphere, which, originally dark green, became almost white. To Rude's surprise, the sphere began to crack. Before everyone's eyes, it broke apart, crumbling in the young man's hand. Laughing and commenting that the sphere was defective, the protagonist took another one. Seeing that, Lidersis realized that if he were hit, it would be the end for him. The senior tried to stop Rude, but the protagonist walked to the front of the group, saying to Lidersis, Hey, I'm serious. If you don't want to be hit, then dodge. The sphere flew at a terrifying speed toward the stage. Everyone was terrified to see the powerful attack. Lidersis gritted his teeth, waiting for the impact, which soon came. The ball hit the target, but not Lidersis. Instead, the senior beside him. Lidersis looked to the side and, startled, saw the senior faint. While the senior's forehead was still steaming, the protagonist apologized. Oh, looks like I missed the target. Seeing the fallen senior, the protagonist teased with a look that made it clear he didn't care. Why were you just standing there? How boring. Dio, still surprised, watched the scene and commented, Amazing. I knew he wasn't an ordinary kid. Everyone in the hall was incredulous, wondering who Rude Chrissy was, the young man who had challenged the seniors. Manon couldn't understand what was happening. The sphere thrown by Rude had passed through the target, while the ones he himself threw barely left a scratch. Above all, the color of Rude's magic sphere was the closest to perfection. He couldn't understand how an Eden had manifested such a color. To him, the only explanation was that Rude had used some trick. Otherwise, there was no way to comprehend who that boy named Rude really was. Ignoring the shocked looks, the protagonist adjusted his dirty clothes, complaining, How annoying! The target is broken and no longer in the center. Walking toward the seniors, he asked, How about we get a new target? Everyone was confused by Rude's words, who looked around and suggested, How about we choose the one who made that unpleasant demonstration, or those who only attack in groups? While looking around, the protagonist took a monosphere and stared at Manon. How about we choose the person who suggested this special class and pick the target? I think that would be quite interesting, right? Manon gritted his teeth upon hearing Rude's suggestion. Furious, he began shouting, "All right then, I'll choose a new target and it will be you, Rude Creasy." While pointing at Rude, Manon ordered furiously, "Everyone get that bastard!" Dio, who had been hiding until that moment, realized he could no longer stay still. He quickly stood up to do something. However, before Dio could take a single step, someone grabbed him by the collar. Looking back, Dio faced a knight with blue hair and intense sea-colored eyes. He instantly recognized that woman. Professor Rowell. Dio was extremely relieved to see Rowell. "Professor, those clads." But Rowell quickly told him to be quiet. The professor walked past Dio, who was surprised to see her hiding. "Professor, what are you doing?" The professor's answer was brief. "I'm watching." Dio was shocked. He tried to argue with her, but a hand covered his mouth, forcing him to stay silent. While trying to protest, Rowell grabbed him and started observing what was happening. The senior who had made the demonstration was hit by a manosphere before he could defend himself. Within seconds, he also fainted. Rude had hit his second target as if it was nothing. The seniors quickly surrounded him. To stop him from grabbing more manospheres, they tried to hold his arms. One of them managed to immobilize Rude's arms, and just as he was about to boast, Rude's fist hit his chin. Rude grabbed the arm of another student who was holding his shirt. That student saw the sole of a shoe coming toward his face. With a kick, Rude knocked down the second enemy. The third senior holding him was so shocked that he forgot to keep his grip. Rude snapped him out of his daze. "Excuse me?" Frightened, the young man jumped back, raising his hands. Manon and his group were terrified. After knocking down several seniors, the protagonist huffed, "I'm in a bad mood now, so can you please not touch me?" The Eden class students were shocked. They couldn't understand how Rude could be so strong. Manon gritted his teeth, furious, realizing he was trapped. Making a decision, he called a subordinate. "Hey, did you prepare any magic orbs?" The young man replied that there were several on the ground, as Manon could see. This only irritated him more. "You idiot, I'm not talking about the experimental ones. I want a real magic orb I can use." Unfortunately, the student revealed that only the experimental ones had been prepared. Manon saw no other option but to grab one of those balls. He didn't want to give up, even realizing Rude was no ordinary person. "As I said, you're the next target. Listen up. Whoever manages to hit Rude Chrissy will be rewarded." Since Rude was alone, Manon believed he had the advantage. He raised the monosphere, infused his own energy into it, and threw it with all his strength, aiming at Rude's face, wanting to wipe that arrogant expression away. Suddenly, the protagonist saw someone move. Lidersis stepped in front and was hit instead. Rude was surprised by the boy's action, even a little annoyed. "Lidersis, why did you get hit instead of me?" Manon was also surprised. He didn't expect such an attitude from the one he called a monster. Angrily, he shouted to everyone around, "You idiots! Why are you standing still? Throw some magic balls. Our targets are these two." Ignoring Manon, the protagonist asked Lidersis if he was okay. One by one, Manon's companions began to grab the spheres, infusing mana into them. Next to Lidersis, the protagonist commented, "Just asking, but is getting hit some kind of hobby of yours? Do you really like it?" Shocked, Lidersis promptly denied, "Of course not." Rude was relieved but insisted, "Then why did you block that sphere for me? You told me to stop caring about you, so you should stop caring whether I get hit or not. That would be fair for both of us, don't you think?" Lowering his head, Lidersis remembered it was all his fault. He didn't want anyone to get hurt. At that moment, the first sphere was thrown toward the two. The protagonist pushed Lidersis aside and, seeing the sphere approaching, caught it with his bare hands. When Lidersis looked on in shock, Rude said, "What are you talking about? This isn't your fault." Looking at the one who had thrown the ball, the protagonist infused mana into the sphere in his hand and declared, "I just hate people like them." Furious, other clad seniors grabbed monospheres. Before a pair could throw them, one was hit. Meanwhile, Rude dodged a ball, mocking internally, "How careless." Grabbing a small sphere, he ignored those thrown at him and hit another senior. One sphere almost hit him, but he caught it midair and threw it at the back of a third senior, while another ground his teeth before realizing a small sphere was coming his way. Having knocked down 4 enemies, the protagonist wondered how many were left and how Lidersis was doing. Looking at Lidersis, he noticed he was being hit by several monospheres while Eden students hid behind him. Even with his hands tied behind his back, Lidersis stood still, serving as a shield. Amid the fear, Eden students were surprised by his attitude. Rin was the first to act, realizing Lidersis was truly hurt. However, he ignored her help and wouldn't let her get close. Still, Rin walked behind him, determined at least to untie him. Even her friend was shocked and worried about possible retaliation. Ignoring what might happen, Rin apologized. While Lidersis absorbed the girl's words, the action continued frantically on the other side. A bright mana ball crossed the hall. A senior tried to escape, but the sphere sent by Rude hit him in the back. The protagonist looked around and realized that was the 12th he had knocked down. Aiming in another direction, he faced the last ones remaining. They were exactly Manon and his two direct subordinates. Manon gritted his teeth, sweating cold as he saw Rude watching him. The protagonist walked slowly. Hearing his name leave Rude's mouth, Manon felt enormous pressure. All around, his companions were fallen. He couldn't help but wonder if he was living a nightmare. Arriving in front of the stage where Manon was, the protagonist smiled. So, shall we continue? On the other side, Lidersis, now untied, was thoughtful. Rin tried to find words to apologize, but felt someone grab her arm. Her friend had approached, calling her to come back. Looking back, Rin saw the looks her classmates were giving her. But she did not back down. Instead, she faced them. How long will you keep this up? Do you really think Artian is a monster? Lidersis watched, shocked as the girl defended him. Even feeling guilty, Eden students looked away while Rin protested. I'm not good at anything either, but this is very wrong. Artian hasn't done anything to us. Why is he treated like this? Is it because you're afraid of those with better grades? Not even Rin's friend expected her to be so outraged. And Rin didn't stop. I don't know how amazing the students of Hyries or Clad are, but we shouldn't allow them to oppress us. As Rin vented, a young man flew behind her. Everyone realized what had happened and was shocked looking at the floor. Manon's companion was lying unconscious. Facing the stage, Lidersis couldn't believe it. Rude had knocked down Manon's two subordinates and now stared directly at him. Manon, furious, tried to intimidate him. You brat! It's useless to go against us like this. Cheval will definitely do something against you and the monster. The protagonist sighed and approached Manon. I'm tired of this monster story. Look, there are always those who, powerless, are mistreated without being able to react. And there are those who join others just to mistreat someone defenseless. Among these two groups, who do you think the real monsters are? Everyone was surprised by the question and answered internally in unison. The monster is you. A few seconds later, Rude heard Dio's voice calling him hurriedly as he ran. When the protagonist turned around, he saw a monosphere flying toward him. The protagonist simply leaned forward, letting the sphere pass behind him and head toward Manon. Manon didn't have the same reflex and was hit squarely. With the strong impact, Manon's forehead was pushed back, and slowly he fell like a tree felled by a lumberjack. The protagonist was surprised by the sudden attack, as were Lidersis and Rin. In front of everyone, Manon fell, not by an attack from Rude, but by an attack from the unknown. The protagonist was confused and ended up looking in the direction from where the manosphere had come. Seeing the clothes of the person walking toward him, the protagonist immediately recognized her. Ignoring Dio, Professor Raoul climbed onto the stage and walked toward Rude. The protagonist remembered that some time ago at the auction, that woman had fought Shikmoon. He had no idea she was a teacher at Helios Academy. The students were surprised to discover that the professor was the one who had thrown the sphere and felt they were saved. The professor looked at Rude, questioning him. Why did you dodge? The protagonist was confused by the professor's question. Grabbing another sphere, she commented, You could easily stop it. There's no fun if you dodge. Dio, who had seen the professor throw the sphere for the first time, was startled. The professor stared at the protagonist, giving him an instruction. Don't dodge this time. I'm curious. The protagonist tried to convince her not to throw the little sphere, but Raoul was stubborn. Although the professor didn't listen to him, she stopped when 3 people forcibly opened the hall door. Furious, Professor Hale questioned, What's going on here? Raoul was still holding a monosphere. Khan, seeing her, misunderstood the situation even more. He saw the hole made in the stone target, as well as the many students lying on the floor, unconscious or dizzy. Khan raised his hands to his head, increasing the misunderstanding. Professor Raoul! Hearing her name, the professor asked Khan what he wanted. Startled, Professor Khan asked if she was the one who had caused this mess. Knowing they were in trouble, Dio put his hands on his head but remembered he needed to check on Rude. Looking at the stage, Dio found Rude lying on the floor. While Dio was confused, the professors entered the hall with Hale asking to summon the medical team, ordering the students who were fine to go to their classrooms. Before fulfilling her mission, Raoul also took a look at Rude. Later, things seemed to have returned to normal at the academy, except in one area where Eden students were watching an intruder. A blonde young man was irritated with the person in front of him. Hey, because of you, everyone is staring at me. How long are you going to stay here? Go to your territory. But the young man sitting in front of him replied, I bet it's not because of me, Lapis. And where is my territory? The whole academy is our territory. Changing the subject, the young man in front of Lapis commented, I saw a little whoopee during my training. It's hard to believe they become mid-level monsters being so cute, isn't it? Lapis got irritated seeing his friend boasting about his prime training again. Changing the subject, the young man went straight to what interested him. So tell me, Can you tell me now about when you met the dark mage? Irritated, Lapis told the young man to speak quietly. Not wanting to go into detail, Lapis said the same as before. I already said it wasn't a big deal. I just met him by coincidence, that's all. Upset, the young man stood up. Can't you tell me anything else? His personality, what he likes, hobbies, what he wears, or what he eats? Lapis rolled his eyes, asking why his friend wanted to know that. Smiling brightly, the young man explained why. You should know. Becoming like the Dark Mage has always been my goal. I've tried to request audiences through Eophion several times, but it seems his master cuts off any suspicious moves without hesitation. Lapis became increasingly irritated seeing his friend insist on the subject, looking at the young man, crying, I also wanted to meet him, even if by coincidence. Lapis could still remember that night. Among the trees, some firefly lights glowed. A red-haired woman sighed. This is bad. I'm definitely going to have a serious talk with the master when we get back. Lapis watched the woman worry about the man in front of her, who, with a cold attitude, claimed to be fine. When the duo tried to leave, Lapis tried to stop them. Hearing the young man, the duo turned around, staring at him. Lapis felt this could be a unique opportunity, so he wanted to make a proposal. This might be sudden, but I would like to receive your teachings. Lapis swallowed all his pride and bowed. Blow was surprised by the young man's request, who shouted at the top of his lungs, I want to become the disciple of the Dark Mage. I still have a long way to go, but my dream is to become as powerful a mage as the Dark Mage someday. I will do everything I can to not disgrace your reputation, so please. Ren stopped the young man's words, answering on Blow's behalf. I'm sorry, but we can't. Lapis, surprised, heard her apologies. Our Ophion members are required to focus only on missions. According to the rules, accepting disciples is not allowed, so this won't be possible. While Lapis fell for Ren's words, the protagonist asked her if that was true, but she silenced him, without Lapis noticing the deception. Lapis still remembered how embarrassed he had been. He didn't know why he had done that. Seeing a commotion outside, Lapis's friend saw someone on the street. To his surprise, he came face to face with Chevla. He stood up, waving to Chevla, signaling Lapis to do the same. Chevla raised a furrowed eyebrow seeing Linus leaving with Eden students and stared at Lapis's back. You really are short. Lapis didn't care about the look and retorted, coming from someone who acts childish, who's really short here? Seeing Lapis call Chevla childish, Linus laughed, provoking. Lapis couldn't help but get irritated seeing Linus take advantage of the fight. Turning around irritably, Chevla called Anna and the others to leave, so they wouldn't get involved with pathetic people. Lapis frowned irritably. Who's calling who pathetic? How long is he going to keep living like this? Hearing Lapis's words, Linus couldn't help but ask if he was worried about Chevla. While Lapis was teased by Linus, Anna glanced at the duo, withholding her comment. Far from there, in a room, 4 people were gathered. Professor Khan coughed lightly while commenting, We may not believe it, but hearing from the students that the damage we saw on the target, as well as what happened to the intermediate class students, was the work of a single person. Is that true, Rude Chrissy? In front of the professor, the protagonist sighed, with his hand on his head. The protagonist lowered his head even more, answering, I have no idea what you're talking about. Professor Rowell was direct. You are a mage, aren't you? Litursis was surprised to hear the professor's question, who was staring at Rude. The protagonist remained silent, avoiding the question. Khan didn't believe Professor Rowell's question and reprimanded her. Professor, what nonsense are you saying? If young Chrissy really was a mage, why would he act like this? Hiding his expressions, the protagonist wondered if he had acted without thinking. He was worried about others feeling his mana, but quickly remembered he hadn't used even a bit of it. While staring at Rude, Rowell was surprised to see him act that way. The protagonist staggered in the chair while groaning. My head. Khan quickly stood up, worried about the boy. Are you okay? You need to go to the infirmary for a checkup. Rowell didn't fall for Rude's act and calmed the professor. He's fine. Seeing the boy dizzy in front of them, Khan asked how she could know that and reminded her, Earlier, you even brought the young man here when he had fainted. Taking his hands away from his face, the protagonist acted, Please, I'm not sure what you want from me, but I was so surprised to see the magic sphere flying toward me that I can't remember anything else. Rowell became even angrier. Stop lying. Despite her words, Rude continued to pretend to be sick. Sighing, Professor Khan ended the subject. For now, Professor Hale said he would take care of the punishment for the clad students involved in the incident. Until the matter is resolved, you two should go back and rest. The protagonist was surprised to find out he was being allowed to go without any extra hostility. However, Professor Rowell's eyes pierced him. The protagonist understood she wouldn't let him go. The clad students had bandages all over. Seeing them, Chevla asked what had happened to them. The group tried to explain what had happened, but swallowed their words. Chevla couldn't understand why they were all shocked, with frightened looks. In the next moment, 2 people leaving the meeting with the professors caught Chevla's attention. Lidursus noticed Chevel's presence, and their eyes met. Seeing Lidursus stop, the protagonist looked back and, staring at Chevlet, gave a slight smile. Seeing the smile on Rude's face, Chevlet became furious. Lidursus was scared to see Chevlet's furious look, but Rude woke him up. "What are you doing? Let's go, Lidursus." Hearing Rude call him, Lidursus took one last look at Chevel's group and turned, following Rude closely. Frowning, Chevel watched the two Eden boys leave after ignoring him. The duo walked through the corridors of the academy, but soon Lidursus stopped. Noticing he had stopped, the protagonist turned around, asking what had happened. With his head down, Lidursus revealed his concern. "From this point on, more things will start happening because of me." Irritated, he clenched his own trembling hand. Lidursus felt an aura whispering intrusive thoughts. "Lidursus, you always bring misery to everyone around you." Giving in to the voice, Lidursus said, "I will bring misery to you." Annoyed, the protagonist approached Lidursus. "Are you cursing me? You saw what happened earlier. It might be too much for me to say this, but even if 100 of those brats attacked me, they wouldn't be able to do anything to me. It's not your fault, and if anything happens, it won't be a problem." Irritated, the protagonist acted like a father scolding a son, even though he was younger. "Stop worrying about others and worry about yourself, got it? How are you going to live in this cruel world with such a gentle personality?" Despite Rude's words, Lidursus claimed he didn't know anything. The protagonist confirmed that might be true. He might not know what Lidursus was thinking or what was going on, but he knew Lidursus didn't want to tell him something, and so he wouldn't ask. Still, Rude instructed him, "Ask me for help. Don't tell me to ignore you. No matter what it is, I will help you." Lidursus couldn't understand why Rude was helping him, but didn't want to be a bother. I don't need your help." The protagonist fell silent, staring at Lidursus, who took a step back, afraid. The protagonist smiled gently, though his voice had a threatening tone. "Ah, so that's how it is. Understood." Seeing Rude's cynical smile, Lidursus ran away, but the protagonist chased after him. "Where are you going?" In the Eden's classroom, there was an atmosphere of fear among the youths. A young girl asked what was going to happen to them, and another student answered, "It's obvious for the Clads, but doesn't this also involve the Harriers?" Dio, noticing the mood, stayed silent. A young girl at the front of the classroom shouted angrily, "Why did this have to involve us? Isn't it all because of that monster? If he didn't exist, this wouldn't be happening." Another student agreed with her, wondering why they had to suffer because of one person. They recalled what had happened before entering the classroom. Students from other classes, when they saw them, avoided them as if they were insects. Trying to find a solution, a girl suggested asking the teachers to transfer them to other classrooms. Seeing what they were planning, Dio tried to rebel. "What are you talking about?" Suddenly, Rin also stood up, outraged. "Stop it!" Dio was surprised, as were the others. Irritated, Rin began to vent. "Why is everyone so selfish? Why do you only think about yourselves? Why do you feel bad when someone ignores you, when you ignore Lidursus Archon and call him a monster? Do you have any feelings?" Everyone lowered their heads because Rin was right. The girl didn't stop. "We call him a monster and avoid him, but everyone knows the truth. We are the same as him. He is also human. He has feelings." One of the students didn't like Rin's words and questioned if she hadn't seen what happened that day in the library. That day, huge horns had appeared. Everyone was incredulous and scared by what they saw, and above them was Chevel, staring at the person at the center of the incident, Lidursus, surrounded by dark energy. That young girl couldn't understand how Rin could treat that incident as if it were nothing, when she herself felt uncomfortable. Rin was left speechless, but a girl answered for her. "Illusion magic." Everyone turned to look at the girl who was always quiet in class, opening her mouth. "I heard that Chevle von Hadelios is a specialist in illusion magic. Also, the Clads have many magic orbs, and as a skilled Harrier, he is capable of showing an illusion to all of us." Closing her book, she stood up, concluding, "Besides, if there really was something wrong with Artian, he wouldn't even be allowed to be in Helios. If you thought a little, you would find out, but you only care about yourselves." Seeing that she had caused an uproar against her, Eel faced them without fear. "You were just scared by a Harriaz. You fear what Chevely showed you." Seeing Eel confront her, the girl became even more irritated. "Don't act like you've never done anything. You are just like us." Eel did not deny having acted like everyone else, but argued, "The situation has changed. It may have been too shocking for you to forget, but with Rude Creasy, we can turn this situation around." Rin was surprised by Eel's encouragement, as he always ignored the classroom situation, just like everyone else. Even Lidursus, who had just arrived in the room. The young man with hair covering his eyes ended up scaring some students who suddenly saw him. After Lidursus, Rude, who was following him, also arrived in the room, encountering the strange atmosphere that filled the place and becoming extremely confused. If you enjoyed today's recap and want more manhwa content, subscribe to the channel. We're starting this journey now, and I hope that together we can strengthen this new community. So go ahead and like the video, comment for future parts, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next time.